Chapter 249. War was indeed like a tug of war. Victory and defeat were decided in an instant. One side might be too weak for the opponent to grasp the opportunity, and they would be dragged into the abyss of defeat step by step. Marquis Dawson saw the situation on the other side of the rapids, and his eyes were about to bleed. He could not believe that his 30,000 to 40,000 elite troops on the south bank of the rapids could not even hold on for half a day under the attack of the Golden Lion Legion. At this time, the Dwarven army had been completely disorganized. The Golden Lion Legion was like a sharp knife stabbing into the bodies of the Dwarven army, dismembering them. Thus, even though the dwarves did not suffer heavy casualties, there was nothing they could do to reverse the situation. The pontoon bridge was already crowded. The dwarves on the north bank wanted to go over and help, but the dwarves on the south bank kept trying to escape. This caused the pontoon bridge to be blocked, and there were even dwarven soldiers constantly being pushed off the bridge and into the river. Of course, even more dwarven soldiers were pushed into the river from the shore. The rapids was turbulent to begin with. If the soldiers who fell into the river were still wearing armor, they would only drown no matter how good they were at swimming. Gradually, the dwarven soldiers realized that they had lost. Soldiers began to take off their armor, throw away their weapons, and jump into the water in an attempt to swim across the river. Escape was the only thought in the hearts of the dwarven soldiers at this time. Thus, even though they knew that the rapids was behind them, they had completely lost the courage to fight the enemy. They would rather risk being swallowed by the river than face the enemy's blade. Marquis Dawson had just cursed and wanted to personally lead the battle, but fortunately, he was persuaded by the officers beside him. He panted heavily and clenched his fists, his nails digging deep into his flesh. He watched as group after group of dwarves either took the initiative or were driven into the river. For a moment, the river was full of dwarven soldiers. At a glance, it was all bobbing heads and waving hands. The soldiers of the Golden Lion Legion who had rushed to the river began to take out their bows and arrows, calmly and mercilessly killing the dwarves on the river. Soon, numerous corpses appeared on the surface of the river. Marquis Dawson stared blankly at everything in front of him. The screams and shouts of killing all around him seemed to have disappeared. At this moment, he seemed to have been completely isolated from this battlefield. The dream of the dwarves for thousands of years seemed to have left him at this moment. He couldn't accept it. For the sake of this dream, he had already sacrificed too much. A heart-piercing pain caused Marquis Dawson to involuntarily open his mouth. He tried to shout, but when he opened his mouth, it was filled with the smell of blood. Lord Marquis. The dwarven officers saw Marquis Dawson spurt out blood from his mouth, and then he fell down, unconscious. In the evening, the heavy rain finally stopped. The setting sun finally peeked out from the dark clouds, sprinkling the last of its gorgeous rays onto the earth. The battle on the southern shore of Riverrun was basically over. The dwarven army could no longer organize a large-scale resistance. Only a few scattered beasts were left fighting. The pontoon bridge that connected the two sides of the Rapids River had already been set ablaze. This fire was set by the dwarves themselves. Clearly, they wanted to prevent the Golden Lion Legion from pursuing them through the pontoon bridge to the northern shore. But in this way, the remnants of the army on the southern shore had lost all hope of escaping. More and more dwarves began to lay down their weapons and kneel down in surrender. It's a pity. If only Marquis Dawson was on the southern shore. Colin stood by the Rapids River, looking at the dwarven camp on the other side, and said with some regret. In fact, the Golden Lion Legion had already achieved a complete victory in this battle. Although the results of the battle were not out yet, Colin estimated that the number of dwarves defeated on the southern shore was at least 30,000. This kind of loss would definitely make Marquis Dawson's heart ache. The goals set before the battle could be considered to have been perfectly achieved. If the Golden Lion Legion retreated now, even if Marquis Dawson had 10 times the courage, he wouldn't dare to chase them across the river. However, Colin still felt that it wasn't perfect enough. After all, he didn't manage to catch the guy who betrayed Marquis Garcia and the Black Cavalry. Scholar Dwayne was standing beside Colin. After hearing his lament, he smiled slightly and said, "Marquis Dawson isn't famous for charging and breaking through enemy lines. It won't be that easy to catch him on the battlefield." Colin could hear the persuasion in Scholar Dwayne's words. Obviously, although his actions of leading the army to charge and break through the enemy lines had been a great success, Scholar Dwayne was still worried. However, Colin didn't explain too much. After all, he couldn't tell Dwayne that he was immortal and had a group of fearless blood shadow guards protecting him. If he really wanted to pose a threat to Colin, he was afraid that only a powerhouse of the Sanctuary Realm could do it. Seeing that Colin didn't say anything, Scholar Dwayne didn't dwell on this issue. He was a smart person, and knew that going too far was as bad as falling short. After a moment of silence, Scholar Dwayne spoke again, and changed the topic. Lord Viscounts, do you know why Marquis Dawson took the risk of crossing the river to attack us? Colin's eyes narrowed slightly, and he immediately became interested. But, in fact, he had such doubts before. With the natural moat that was the rapids, the side that crossed the river would definitely be at a strategic disadvantage. This time, the Golden Lion Legion was able to completely defeat the 30,000-strong elite dwarven army in just half a day, mainly because they had the advantage of crossing the river. That was why the two sides had been at a stalemate for more than a month at the Rapids River. They had constantly sent small groups of troops back and forth to test the waters, but neither side was willing to take the initiative to cross the river to attack. However, this time, Marquis Dawson took the initiative to attack. Of course, the chaos in the Golden Lion Legion's camp last night was definitely a trigger, but that alone shouldn't be enough to make Marquis Dawson take such a risky action. Scholar Dwayne smiled and said, Lord Viscounts, do you know the Selinsky family? Selinsky? Colin flipped through the memories of his predecessor, but he couldn't find anything. He shook his head and said, I don't know. This shouldn't be a family from the northern frontier, right? Of course not. This isn't even a family from the Radiant Empire. Scholar Dwayne's gaze was deep, as if he had seen through 1,000 years of time and space. The Selinsky family used to be the royal family of the Dwarven Kingdom, but their lineage has long been cut off. Royal family of the dwarves? Colin's heart skipped a beat, and he continued to look at Scholar Dwayne, waiting for his explanation. Although the Selinsky family has become history, it occupies an extremely important position in the hearts of the dwarves. It has even evolved into a spiritual totem in the thousands of years of reminiscence and reminiscence. It has even become a belief. Therefore, if there was still a Selinsky alive, as long as he made a call, the dwarves would definitely surround him, and establishing a kingdom would be a matter of course. However, because the Selinsky family no longer has any descendants, the dwarves will face a problem when they attempt to establish a kingdom on the northern frontier. Who will be the king of the dwarves? Hearing this, Colin roughly understood Scholar Dwayne's meaning. So, Marquis Dawson chose to take the initiative to attack because he wanted to rely on his achievements in defeating the Golden Lion Legion to fight for the position of King of the Dwarves? That's right. Scholar Dwayne nodded. Actually, in terms of title and power, Marquis Menham and Marquis Dawson are about the same. However, Marquis Dawson has a huge stain on his reputation. Colin nodded. He knew that this stain was clearly the matter of Marquis Dawson betraying the one he had pledged his loyalty to, Marquis Garcia. Because of this stain on his reputation, if Marquis Dawson doesn't have any outstanding achievements, then after the dwarves establish a kingdom, the position of King of the Dwarves will definitely belong to Marquis Menham. What a pity. Now that he risked crossing the river and suffered a crushing defeat, it seems that Marquis Dawson has no hope of competing with Marquis Menham. Scholar Dwayne suddenly smiled coldly. Sir Viscounts, I feel that Marquis Dawson might not be willing to sit and watch Marquis Menham ascend the throne of King of the Dwarves. Oh? Why is that? Because the Dawson family had married a daughter of the Selinsky family. Therefore, after the Selinsky family perished, the Dawson family felt that they were the true inheritors of the King of the Dwarves bloodline. This thought became more and more intense as the Selinsky family's position rose in the hearts of the dwarves, to the point that it became a kind of paranoid belief. It is because of this that Marquis Dawson didn't hesitate to betray Marquis Garcia, who he was deeply indebted to, in order to create the conditions for the dwarves to establish a kingdom. It is also because of this that I feel that Marquis Dawson won't easily give up on the idea of competing with Marquis Menham for the throne of King of the Dwarves. Colin's eyes lit up. He immediately realized that if Marquis Dawson was truly unwilling, then this was an opportunity that could be exploited. Thinking of this, the two looked at each other and revealed a smile full of deep meaning. Chapter 250. As night fell, the fire on the south bank of the river was still burning. It was the Golden Lion Legion burning the corpses. The preliminary results of the battle were already out. In this battle, the Golden Lion Legion had suffered more than 4,000 casualties. They had wiped out nearly 10,000 dwarves and captured more than 15,000 dwarves. In addition, there were also a large number of dwarves who had jumped into the river. Such a result could be said to be a great victory for the Golden Lion Legion. Marquis Dawson's threat had been greatly reduced. At the very least, if the Golden Lion Legion chose to retreat at this time, the dwarves on the other side of the river would definitely not dare to pursue them. This battle also gave Colin a more intuitive understanding of the combat effectiveness of the Golden Lion Legion. It was indeed worthy of being called the most elite unit of the House of St. Hilda. If the Black Cavalry was the best cavalry in the northern frontier, then the Golden Lion Legion could be regarded as the best infantry in the northern frontier. This also made Colin covet this army. Although cavalry was invincible in the wild, there were still many restrictions after all. For example, it would be difficult for them to exert their strength in a siege or in a harsh terrain. Therefore, Colin needed an elite infantry legion as a supplement. Originally, Colin had considered the Half-Elves Silver Moon Guard. However, it seemed that the Golden Lion Legion's combat effectiveness was obviously much higher than the Silver Moon Guard. Therefore, he decided to use this army instead. Therefore, even though it was late at night, Colin still followed Vera to visit the wounded soldiers and win their hearts. It had to be said that with Vera's identity, it was indeed very easy for her to do such a thing. In addition, she was also very beautiful and kind. Every soldier who had a friendly conversation with her was so excited that they burst into tears. It was as if they were willing to sacrifice their lives for her. After following them for a while, Colin realized that he was actually a little redundant. Vera's charm had completely overshadowed Colin's existence. He quickly became a small follower. After that, Colin simply handed the task of winning over the people's hearts to Vera alone. After all, they were husband and wife. Being loyal to Vera was basically equivalent to being loyal to Colin. After leaving the casualty barracks, Colin saw Knight Campbell waiting for him. It seemed like he had something to report. What happened? Lord Viscounts, the dwarven prisoners have been properly settled. May I ask, how should we deal with them? Colin frowned at the mention of captives. According to his previous 2 battles, he would not give captives a way out. However, that time in the eastern region was to avenge the Black Cavalry. That time in the giant demon empire was because he was in an enemy country and couldn't settle down the captives, so he had no choice but to kill them all. However, Colin also knew that if he killed too many captives, he would definitely suffer a backlash. At the very least, once Colin's notoriety spread, the next time he encountered an enemy, they would definitely consider his reputation and not dare to surrender. They would only fight to the death. Moreover, strictly speaking, the dwarven prisoners this time were also his own people in the northern frontier. If he really killed them all, then Colin's reputation would be ruined. Does the Golden Lion Legion have enough food? We can still last for more than a month. All right then. Keep these captives alive for now. However, control their food intake. Make sure they don't starve to death. Yes, Lord. Knight Campbell nodded and was about to leave when he heard Colin's order. By the way, pick out all the professions among the captives and send them to me. Yes. Although Knight Campbell didn't understand what Colin was planning to do, he still accepted the order and left. Obviously, Colin was preparing to turn the professions among the captives into blood slaves to supplement the Blood Shadow Squad. Colin was looking forward to the harvest this time because he knew that there was a 5th Order warrior among the captives. In the entire Empire of Light, there were only 2 paladins and no more than 10 6th Order professions. Therefore, a 5th Order professions were definitely the top combat power. As he thought of this, Colin walked briskly back to his tent. As the night deepened, Vera finally finished her condolences to the wounded soldiers. After rubbing her sore waist, Vera also walked out of the wounded camp and prepared to return to her tent to rest. On the way back, she met Mage Kudos, who seemed to have been waiting for her for a long time. "Teacher? It's already so late. Haven't you gone to bed yet?" Vera's voice was a little hoarse. Obviously, she had spoken too much during her condolences. "I couldn't sleep, so I came out for a walk." Kudos smiled and glanced at the guards behind Vera. Vera immediately understood what the other party meant. She turned around and said, "You can go back first. I will accompany teacher for a walk." The guards hesitated for a moment and retreated to a certain distance, but they did not go too far. "Teacher, if you have anything to say, you can just say it." Kudos looked at Vera for a moment and suddenly said, "I haven't seen you for more than a year and you seem to have matured a lot." Vera gently ran her fingers through her hair and said with a smile, "I have to grow up. I can't be a carefree child for the rest of my life." Kudos nodded and his eyes were full of praise. "Indeed, if it was a year ago, you would have probably been eager to ask me what the forbidden spell that killed your father was." Vera was silent. In fact, on the day when Kudos appeared, Vera was already prepared to ask him about this matter, but she was stopped by Colin. Moreover, Colin also told her that Wizard Cusius, who had taken the initiative to look for her, might not have had good intentions. Originally, with Vera's kind personality, she would not judge her teacher with such malicious intentions. However, after experiencing the betrayal of her adoptive father, this 19-year-old girl was no longer as trusting as she used to be. When he saw that Vera was not speaking, Kudos sighed and said, "Vera, I hope that you know that teacher will never hurt you." Vera raised her head and looked at her teacher, but she immediately lowered her head and whispered, "Well, I believe you." Kudos did not know if Vera really believed him or if she was just being perfunctory. However, he knew that his student would not be easily moved by a few words. To be honest, the reason why teacher came to the northern frontier this time is indeed because of Mr. Fong from the St. Thean family. Moreover, I am also aware of what he has done in Fallen Eagle City. Of course, I did not know that his target was your father. If I had known about this earlier, I would have definitely stopped him. Vera suddenly raised her head and looked directly at her teacher before she asked, "So, what exactly happened in Fallen Eagle City? Did Mr. Fong really sacrifice an entire city of people to complete the forbidden spell?" Kudos nodded solemnly. "After Mr. Fong and I discovered the Eyes of Petrification, we spent nearly 20 years modifying and perfecting it. Finally, we developed a new forbidden spell called the Trial's Eye." "Trial's Eye?" "Yes." Kudos took out a scroll from his robe and handed it to Vera. "This is the scroll. You can take it and study it yourself." Vera was a little stunned when she saw Kudos's honest attitude. After a long while, he took the forbidden spell-casting scroll with his trembling hands. However, she did not open it to look at it. With Vera's character, she was not willing to study or even understand a spell that required the sacrifice of an entire city of people, no matter how powerful it was. However, as a mage, her curiosity made her really want to know what this terrible forbidden spell was. Kudos looked at Vera, who was in a dilemma, and smiled. "I have already given you the scroll. You can study it carefully. However, remember to keep it a secret. This forbidden spell is not only the hope for the rise of the mages, but it could also be the curse that kills us." After saying this sentence, Kudos left. Vera was left standing in the same place as she stared at the scroll in her hand. Chapter 251. The Lives of 300,000 Civilians and an Eye. Are these the materials needed for the Trial's Eye spell? In the tent, Vera was curled up in Colin's arms like a kitten. She was very resistant to the spell scroll in Colin's hand, but she still carefully explained the Elvish language on the scroll. So, for the spellcaster, he only needs to pay the price of an eye, and the real backlash of the forbidden spell will be borne by the 300,000 civilians? Yes. Vera's face was full of fear and anger. "This is simply a devil's spell. I really can't imagine why my teacher would want to develop such a thing." Colin patted Vera's little head to comfort her, but he did not feel much of a change in his heart. He even thought that the creation of this forbidden spell was inevitable. For a long time, It had been an eternal pain for the mages to not be able to break through the Sixth Order and enter the Sanctuary Realm. However, a forbidden spell that was as powerful as a Sanctuary Realm required the spellcaster to pay the price of his life. Such a price would obviously drive the mages to constantly look for ways to improve the forbidden spell. Even if they could not avoid the backlash of the forbidden spell, they would definitely try to find a scapegoat to help them share the burden of the backlash. Now they had succeeded. This Trial's Eye forbidden spell was definitely a work of genius, even if one disregarded the moral issues involved. Colin could even imagine what kind of impact this forbidden spell would have on the current situation of the Empire of Light once it was spread out. The Knights of the Empire, especially the two Holy Knights, would definitely not sit back and watch the Mage Council gain control of such a terrible forbidden spell. Therefore, for Wizard Cusius to hand over the forbidden spell casting scroll to Vera so easily, could it be that he wanted to pull someone to share the hatred? Or was he trying to divert the disaster? What about the spellcaster? This is not a spell that a low-level mage can cast, right? Well, it has to be a Sixth-Order mage. Colin was secretly relieved. At least Vera did not have the ability to cast this forbidden spell. Therefore, she would not be the primary target of the Holy Knights for the time being. When Cusius gave the scroll to you, did he say anything else? Vera thought for a moment and said, "He said that he would never hurt me." Ha! Colin sneered secretly. Of course, he wouldn't believe such words. Nothing else? No more. Colin frowned. He was still unable to determine Wizard Kudo's true intentions with just this bit of information. However, he did not let his guard down. He had already sent out the newly transformed blood slave, the fifth-step warrior Tomu, to keep a close eye on Cusius. If the other party made any strange movements, he would not hesitate to give the order to kill. Colin, this scroll, what should we do with it? Vera asked. She really wanted to destroy this casting scroll that reeked of blood, but she could not help but want to explore the mysterious spell recorded in it. After all, this was the first forbidden spell that could allow the caster to survive. Even if the method it used to transfer the backlash of the forbidden spell was extremely inhumane, it still provided a valuable train of thought that had great reference value. Keep it for now. Colin could see the hesitation in Vera's heart, so he tried to persuade her. It can be used as a reference. Moreover, there is definitely more than one casting scroll. Even if you destroy this scroll, you will not be able to stop the spread of the forbidden spell. After a while, Vera said in a muffled voice, "All right." Colin kissed Vera's forehead and said gently, "Well, don't think too much about it. Rest early. We will be withdrawing to Winter City tomorrow." Is it that urgent? Well, the Menham family's army is only 3 or 4 days away from us. If we do not withdraw quickly, I am afraid that we will be cut off by the enemy. Early the next morning, the Golden Lion Legion's camp on the southern bank of River Run was busy. The commotion here obviously alarmed the dwarven sentinels on the other side of the river. They thought that the Golden Lion Legion was preparing to cross the river and counterattack. They were so scared that they hurriedly went back to report. At this time, Marquis Dawson had not completely recovered from yesterday's fiasco. When he heard that the Golden Lion Legion was preparing to counterattack, his face immediately turned pale. Thus, this dwarven marquis, who had already become a frightened bird, immediately gave the order to retreat. This time, an extremely strange scene appeared on both sides of the river run. The two sides of the battle began to retreat almost at the same time, as if yesterday's battle was just a dream. Colin looked at the dwarven army that was retreating even faster than his own army. He could not help but smile. This Marquis Dawson was more timid than he had thought. Knight Campbell suddenly suggested, "Lord Viscounts, the Dawson family is probably not going to make it. Should we pursue them and kill our way across the river run?" Colin glanced at him, thinking that the new commander of the Golden Lion Legion was deliberately trying to show off. He asked calmly, "Are you confident that you can take down Ironforge City in a short time?" Contrary to Colin's expectations, Knight Cambanine nodded solemnly, "Lord Viscount, you may not know this, but Ironforge City is not a city that is easy to defend and hard to attack. As long as you give me enough support and trust, I can take it down in 3 days." Only then did Colin become serious. He turned to look at Scholar Dwayne. Scholar Dwayne nodded. Knight Cambanine is right. Ironforge City is not a strong city. When the Dawson family pledged their loyalty to the Lord of the Northern Frontier, to show their sincerity and to dispel the fear the lords of the Northern Frontier had towards the dwarves, Ironforge City's walls were built very low. The highest point was no more than 3 meters. Such a wall can only keep some bandits out of the city. If it really faces an elite army, it's practically useless. Colin frowned and thought for a while. If they could take down Ironforge City and capture Marquis Dawson, it would be of great help to the Northern Frontier. He asked, "So you agree to cross the river and give chase?" Scholar Dwayne shook his head and said, "No. I insist on withdrawing back to Frostwinter. But first, attacking a city is risky. If we can't take down Ironforge City, we will face the risk of being outflanked by the Menham family. Therefore, withdrawing back to Frostwinter is the safest option. Moreover, Lord Viscounts, don't forget that there is still the Oman family. Though they have just experienced a crisis, we don't know how many soldiers Earl Oman has gathered after the chaos. We also don't know where they have gone. This is a dangerous factor that cannot be ignored. It's best that we act prudently in case of any accidents." Colin nodded. Although the Golden Lion Legion had just won a great battle, their current situation was not optimistic. Knight Campbell's proposal was a little too radical. If they were defeated, the Golden Lion Legion would fall into an abyss of no return. Colin glanced at the senior officers of the Golden Lion Legion and suddenly asked, "Everyone, what do you think?" Most of the officers replied without hesitation, "We also think that withdrawing is the safest option. Of course, the Golden Lion Legion will follow your and Miss Vera's orders." "Good." Colin nodded with satisfaction. However, he immediately noticed that Knight Lewis was not among the officers in front of him. "Where is Knight Lewis?" Knight Campbell hesitated for a moment before he replied, "Lord Viscounts, after yesterday's battle, we did not see Knight Lewis." Colin's brows immediately furrowed as he continued to ask, "Did he lead the army into battle yesterday?" Knight Campbell shook his head. If he did not go forward to kill the enemy, it meant that he did not want to die on the battlefield. Colin sneered. He immediately guessed that Knight Lewis had taken advantage of the chaos to escape. Scholar Dwayne whispered into Colin's ear, "Lord Viscounts, Knight Lewis used to be young Master Joyce's riding teacher." After hearing Scholar Dwayne's words, Colin was certain that Knight Lewis must have taken advantage of the chaos to escape. Since Knight Lewis had a deep bond with Joyce, he definitely did not want to see Vera take control of the Golden Lion Legion and become the Dukes of the North. Therefore, he must have gone to Frostwinter City to inform them. Thinking up to this point, Colin immediately made up his mind and ordered, "Withdraw immediately. Frostwinter City cannot be lost." "Yes." Chapter 252. Clop, clop, clop. A warhorse galloped past, causing the dew that had accumulated on the flowers by the roadside to fall to the ground. The knight on the horse was anxious. He kept whipping his warhorse as though he was not satisfied with the speed. But soon he had to slow down. This was because a group of sentries appeared in front of him. Looking at their armor and flags, they were clearly soldiers of the Oman family. "Nay, nay," the warhorse slowly came to a stop. The knight on the horse said loudly to the sentries of the Oman family, "I am the deputy commander of the Golden Lion Legion, Knight Lewis. Is Earl Oman nearby?" The captain of the Sentinel Cavalry looked at Knight Lewis and nodded. "Please follow me." A moment later, Knight Lewis followed the sentries to the Oman family's camp. Looking around, Knight Lewis realized that although the camp was still in order, the soldiers still had a trace of fear and confusion on their faces. Obviously, after the incident at the camp, Earl Oman had barely gathered the soldiers. However, the soldiers' mental state was not good. They could not withstand a big battle. "Knight Lewis, where are you going in such a hurry?" Earl Oman chuckled as he looked at Knight Lewis. It seemed that the commotion from before did not bother him much. Knight Lewis put on a friendly smile and stepped forward. "Earl Oman, I think our destination is the same." Earl Oman's eyes flashed. "Where do you think my destination is?" The smile on Knight Lewis's face became brighter as he said word by word. Winter City. Erlemon's pupils shrank slightly, but his expression did not change. He asked calmly, "Why do you think I will go to Winter City?" Knight Lewis smiled and shook his head. Erlemon, at this time, let's not hide anymore. Erlemon nodded and said frankly, "Well, in that case, I will tell you the truth. I have an old grudge with Viscount Angley. You were young Master Joyce's writing teacher. We do not want to see Miss Vera inherit the position of Dukes of the North. Therefore, cooperation is the best choice." "That's right," Knight Lewis said excitedly. He extended his hand and placed it in front of Erlemon. Erlemon immediately understood. He extended his right hand and shook Knight Lewis's hand. An alliance was thus formed. Knight Lewis immediately suggested, "Earl, our top priority now is to take control of Winter City. We cannot allow Vera to bring the Golden Lion Legion back to the city." Erlemon nodded in agreement, but his tone was serious. "I heard that the Golden Lion Legion was fighting with the Dawson family. Could it be that the battle has already ended?" Knight Lewis sighed. "It's over. The Dawson clan suffered a crushing defeat." Erlemon was stunned and said hurriedly, "Then we have to hurry to Chilly Winter Castle. Do you know how many soldiers are left in the city?" "There are only 8,000 city defense soldiers in Chilly Winter, and their combat power isn't strong." "How many troops do you have now?" 30,000. "That is indeed a little tricky." Knight Lewis frowned. When he had entered the camp, he had observed that the Oman family's army was not in good condition. Moreover, Chilly Winter City was the strongest city on the northern frontier. If they really wanted to attack, 30,000 people would not be able to take it down in a short period of time. "Of course we can't force our way in." Erlemon shook his head. "Let's enter the city first, find young Master Joyce, pledge our loyalty to him, and ask him to preside over the situation as the first successor of the Duke. Only then can we take control of Chilly Winter City and let my army in." "But let's do that." After the two reached an agreement, they immediately took action. Erlemon handed the army over to his family's knight, while he and Knight Lewis led a group of cavalry to Chilly Winter City. Chilly Winter City was currently shrouded in a somber atmosphere. News of the Duke of St. Hilda's death had already reached the Lion's Roar fort via carrier pigeons, but to avoid causing excessive panic, the news was only spread among the nobles. The commoners in the city were still kept in the dark. Fortunately, Chilly Winter City had been under martial law since the outbreak of the rebellion at the beginning of the year. Hence, even though the city was on high alert, it did not cause much panic. After nightfall, Chilly Winter City was completely silent. Because the city defense army had implemented a strict curfew, after 8 p.m., the streets were completely empty. There were only groups of patrolling soldiers. The thick and heavy city gates had been tightly shut, and the tall drawbridge had been pulled up. The black iron chains that were as thick as a child's arm were especially cold in the dim light. The city defense army soldiers on night duty were used to such cold nights. They did not know about the Duke of St. Hilda's death, so they were not too flustered. Moreover, the tall and sturdy city walls of Chilly Winter City gave them a strong sense of security. To them, even if the city was surrounded by the rebel army, it would not be easy to take it down. On the tower of the southern city gate, a few city defense army officers were secretly playing Gwent cards. Their trusted subordinates who were on the lookout stood by the side. But all of a sudden, the sound of a warning whistle rang out from the top of the city wall, scaring the officers so much that they hurriedly packed up their cards and rushed out with their weapons. "What's the matter?" the officer asked while panting. The soldier pointed to the bottom of the city, where the sound of hurried horse hooves could be heard. Then, dozens of shadowy cavalrymen raised torches and walked towards the city gates. When the cavalrymen arrived at the bottom of the city walls, a familiar voice was heard. "I'm the deputy commander of the Golden Lion Legion, Knight Lewis. Please open the city gates." The officer on night duty clearly recognized Knight Lewis's voice and shouted down, "Knight Lewis." "Apologies, Lord Lewis. The Duke has ordered that the city gates of Chilly Winter City are not to be opened at night. Hence, I'll lower a hanging basket to bring you up. I have Erlemon with me." Previously, when Earl Amon surrendered to the Golden Lion Legion, Knight Nelson had sent a messenger to chilly Winter City to deliver the heads of Penny and Lawrence. Hence, Earl Amon was no longer a traitor in the eyes of the City Defense Army officer. However, if Earl Amon had come alone, the officer might not have let him in. After all, he had a record of betrayal, so he would have to report to his superiors before making a decision. But because Knight Lewis was personally accompanying them, the officer did not suspect anything. He ordered 2 baskets to be lowered and brought Knight Lewis and Earl Amon up. After entering the city, the 2 of them did not stay on the tower for long. They immediately rushed to Lion's Roar Fort. When they entered the fort, they were told that young Master Joyce had fallen asleep. Knight Lewis was anxious and asked the butler, Drindon, if he could wake young Master Joyce up. But the butler shook his head coldly, indicating that everything could wait until the next day. The 2 of them had no choice but to follow the servant to the guest room to rest. The night was dark, but Knight Lewis tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. In his frustration, he decided to take a stroll. Then he realized that the light in Earl Amon's room was still on. It was obvious that the Earl was not asleep. So, Knight Lewis knocked on Earl Amon's door. Earl Amon welcomed him in, poured 2 cups of water, and handed one to Knight Lewis. He then asked, Butler Drindon, do you know who you support? Knight Lewis took a sip of water and said hesitantly, it should be Joyce. After all, Vera was sent by the Duke of St. Hilda to study arcana at Ewell University. She should not have much of a relationship with the butler. Maybe. Earl Amon had calmed down as well. He suddenly felt that his plan with Knight Lewis was still a little crude. After thinking for a moment, Earl Amon said, I think that we should not rush to see young Master Joyce tomorrow. But the Knight of Lewis stood up from his chair in a hurry. He thought that Count Amon was afraid and hurriedly advised, things have already come to this point. It's too late for you to regret it. Earl Amon gestured for Knight Lewis to calm down. He then said in a low voice, the butler's lack of cooperation made me realize that the previous plan was too rough. We have to understand the situation in the city. For example, who is in charge of the order in winter? Who is in charge of the city defense? What is their attitude? Also, there is the church. I remember that the Northern Frontier Diocese just had a new archbishop. Do you know this person? Knight Lewis shook his head in annoyance. If there is enough time, of course, we can do that. But don't forget that the Golden Lion Legion is retreating. If we can't control winter as soon as possible, with your army outside the city, can you really stop the Golden Lion Legion? You misunderstood me. Earl Amon was about to explain, but he suddenly stopped. Knight Lewis was puzzled, but he heard light footsteps outside the door. Asterisk dong dong dong. Asterisk the 2 of them looked at each other warily, then Earl Amon went to open the door. Butler Drindon. It's so late. What's the matter? The old butler of the House of St. Hilda stood outside the door expressionlessly. When he saw Earl Amon, he smiled and said, Are the 2 of you still awake? It just so happens that I have something to show you. Oh. Earl Amon raised his eyebrows and said hurriedly, Please come in. Butler Drindon walked into the room and nodded at Knight Lewis. He smiled and said, Knight Lewis, you're here too. Then he took out a scroll of parchment from his pocket and said calmly, The Duke of St. Hilda made a will. Would the 2 of you like to take a look? Will? Earl Amon and Knight Lewis could not help but exclaim. They stared at the parchment in the old butler's hand, unable to look away. Chapter 253. In the silence of the night, only the faint hooting of an owl could be heard. In the small guest room, the atmosphere was so tense that it was almost suffocating. Earl Amon and Knight Lewis stood there in a daze. They were caught off guard by the news from Butler Dington. They never thought that the Duke of St. Hilda would really make a will. For a moment, thousands of thoughts flashed through the minds of the 2 men, but none of them were clear. Butler Dington did not seem to mind the silence of the 2 men as he opened the parchment in his hands. Earl Amon and Knight Lewis's breathing suddenly became heavy. They looked at each other, then immediately turned back to the butler, as if waiting for the final judgment of fate. Dington did not seem to sense the abnormalities of the 2 men. He cleared his throat and read the contents of the parchment. I, Cyril St. Hilda, as the 17th Dukes of the North, confer the title of Marquis of the Northern Frontier to Vera St. Hilda. After my death, she will inherit the position of Dukes of the North and wield the authority of the Northern Frontier. She will inherit the glory of St. Hilda. Impossible. Before Drindon could finish reading, Knight Lewis cried out loudly, his face full of disbelief and fear. Earl Amon's face was gloomy, and his eyes flashed with a dangerous light. His tone became as hard as iron. Sir Darrington, are you mistaken? Young Master Joyce is ranked before Miss Vera. Butler Darrington said solemnly, how could I be mistaken? This is the will written by the Duke of St. Hilda himself. I don't believe it. Knight Lewis began to move towards the door, obviously preparing to block the exit. Earl Amon also slowly approached Butler Darrington and said in a low voice, can you let me see this will? Butler Darrington did not seem to realize his situation at all. He calmly handed the will to Earl Amon. Earl Amon quickly scanned it, and then his face became completely gloomy. He recognized the handwriting of the Duke of St. Hilda. The will was real. Knight Lewis could tell from the change in Earl Amon's expression that something was amiss. He immediately clenched his fists, prepared to turn hostile at any moment. My lord, have you finished reading it? Meng Chao asked calmly. Have you finished reading it? Earl Almond slowly put away the parchment and stared at Butler Darrington for a moment. Then he exchanged a look with Knight Lewis. Finally, he turned around and threw the will into the fireplace. The flames instantly ignited the parchment, but Draglinden seemed to be oblivious to it. Only when the Duke of St. Hilda's will was reduced to ashes did Count Oman and Knight Lewis finally let out a sigh of relief. However, Butler Drindon's behavior puzzled the two of them. Why didn't he stop it? Earl Amon suddenly laughed before he turned around and said to the butler, Mr. Felden, you don't want to see Miss Vera inherit the position of the Duke, do you? A smile finally appeared on Butler Darrington's cold face. He nodded and said, yes. The tension in the room suddenly disappeared. Knight Lewis laughed and said, Mr. Butler, you should have said so earlier. We almost misunderstood you. Butler Darrington said meaningfully, if you had said so earlier, how would I have known your true attitude? Earl Amon clapped his hands and smiled. Mr. Butler is right. Knight Lewis nodded again and again. After a while, he asked in confusion, Mr. Butler, why do you think the Duke wants to make Miss Vera the heir? Butler Darrington smiled slightly. You probably don't know this, but the Duke made this will in September last year. September last year? Knight Lewis was still confused. However, Earl Amon had already reacted. Miss Vera's coming-of-age ceremony was in September last year, right? Yes. Butler Darrington nodded. It was after Miss Vera's coming-of-age ceremony that the Duke made this will and handed it over to me for safekeeping. Knight Lewis suddenly remembered that the previous Marquis of the Northern Frontier, who was also the Duke's second son, Adams, was poisoned to death at the coming-of-age ceremony. It turned out that at that time, the Duke of St. Hilda had already decided on the heir to the Marquis position, but he did not announce it in public. But why didn't the Duke announce that Vera was the Marquis of the Northern Frontier? As soon as Knight Lewis was about to ask this question, he realized that it was a stupid question. This was because the Duke had already betrothed Vera to the half-elf prince, Tup Modawin. How could a woman who was married to a different race inherit the position of the Dukes of the North? But why did the Duke of St. Hilda make such a will? Didn't the Duke already marry Vera to Prince Tup at that time? Why did he make a will to let her inherit the position of the Marquis? When he heard Knight Lewis's question, Butler Darrington hesitated for a moment and finally answered. Actually, I can't give you a clear answer to this question, but according to my judgment, his lordship didn't want to make Vera his successor, but under some pressure, he had no choice but to make such a will. Therefore, I have always felt that this will is not the embodiment of the Duke's true will, and it is most appropriate for it to be destroyed now. Under pressure? Earl Amon asked. Who can pressure the Duke of St. Hilda? Butler Darrington shook his head, indicating that he did not know. Earl Amon's eyes flashed, and he suddenly felt that this must be related to the death of Marquis Adams, and perhaps Vera's background. At this time, Knight Lewis's slightly impatient voice sounded in the room. Since the will has been destroyed, don't bother about it anymore. The most important thing is to control Winter Castle. We must not let Vera bring the Golden Lion Legion into the city. Earl Oman nodded in agreement. Mr. Butler, if I remember correctly, the commander of Winter Castle's City Defense Force is Knight Thomas, right? Do you know if he will support young Master Joyce or Miss Vera? Why don't we invite him over and ask him personally? Butler Dragonden said with a faint smile. Earl Oman and Knight Lewis looked at each other and nodded immediately. But in the dark night, Knight Thomas followed the attendant to the reception room of the Lion's Roar Castle. Knight Thomas's surname was St. Hilda, and he was the cousin of the Duke of St. Hilda. He had a hoarse face and was serious in speech and manner. He did not have a prominent reputation in the northern frontier. However, to be able to become the commander of Winter Castle's City Defense Force, Knight Thomas was definitely a loyal follower of the Duke of St. Hilda. Entering the living room, Knight Thomas saw Butler Dankton. Of course, Count Amon and Knight Lewis were also there. As the commander of the City Defense Force, Knight Thomas knew that the latter too had entered the city that night. Mr. Butler, may I know why you are looking for me? Knight Thomas, there has been no news of the Duke, and there are even rumors of his death. Now that the rebel army is approaching, I think that Winter Castle needs a leader to lead everyone through this difficult time. Who do you think is suitable? The title of Lord of the Northern Region was leader, not Duke of the Northern Region. After all, the succession of a duke had to be conferred by the royal family. Of course, they had no right to decide who would become the Lord of the Northern Region. However, Knight Thomas understood the meaning behind his words. He was asking him to choose a side. Where's the Golden Lion Legion? What's the situation like? Seeing Knight Lewis in Winter Castle and the butler asking him to choose a side, Knight Thomas immediately realized that this matter had something to do with the Golden Lion Legion. Sure enough, Knight Lewis said in a sorrowful tone, the Golden Lion Legion has been forcibly recruited by Miss Vera. They are fighting a decisive battle with the Dawson family by the Rapids River. Knight Thomas narrowed his eyes, and his expression was uncertain. No one knew what he was thinking. Then Earl Amon asked, Knight Thomas, do you think that Miss Vera is qualified to lead the Golden Lion Legion when the Duke of St. Hilda's life is unknown? Knight Thomas's heart skipped a beat. He knew that the most critical moment had come. Furthermore, he acutely sensed that Count Allman and Knight Lewis had him sandwiched between them and were ready to attack. If he did not answer well, he might not be able to leave this place unscathed. Of course not. Young Master Joyce is the first successor of the Duke. Ooh, the stagnant atmosphere in the hall was instantly relieved. Butler Dankton also had a smile on his face, and he asked, So, do you also think that young Master Joyce should be the leader of Winter Castle in the current situation? Yes, Knight Thomas said in a deep voice. Although Knight Thomas did not have an obvious preference between Vera and Joyce, he knew that he had to make a choice in the current situation. And this choice could only be Joyce. The glimmer of dawn tore through the darkness that shrouded the earth, and the first ray of dawn shone on the highest point of the Lion's Roar Castle. After Joyce finished washing up with the help of the maids, Butler Dankton stepped forward and bowed. Young Master Joyce, there are a few guests waiting for you outside. Invite them in. Joyce did not mind, but he was a little puzzled as to why there were guests so early in the morning. But the butler went out personally and led Earl Oman and the other two in. Joyce obviously knew the three of them, and he greeted them with a smile. Good morning, Earl Oman, Uncle Thomas, Knight Lewis. Good morning, young Master Joyce. The three of them greeted him in unison. Then, they knelt on one knee in front of Joyce and raised their swords above their heads. Joyce was stunned. He understood that this was an act of swearing allegiance, but he looked at Butler Dankton and saw him giving him an encouraging look. Joyce seemed to have understood something, and a look of excitement appeared on his face. He immediately walked up to Count Allman, took the sword, and placed it on his shoulder. I, Talas Oman, offer my unconditional loyalty to the noble descendant of the Paladin family, Joyce St. Silda. From now on, your will be my direction, and your orders will be my highest creed. Joyce took a deep breath and tried his best to imitate his father. I accept your loyalty. Chapter 254. The gates of Frostwinter were tightly shut. The Golden Lion Legion was waiting outside the city in an orderly manner. In front of the formation, Colin listened to the messenger's report with an uncertain expression on his face. Lord Viscount, Miss Vera, the city has sent word that the Golden Lion Legion is not allowed to enter due to the instability of the current situation and the rising of rebel armies. To ensure the safety of Winter Castle, the city gates cannot be opened for the Golden Lion Legion to enter. However, young Master Joyce said that you and Madam can enter the city, but you cannot bring more than 100 guards with you. Ha! What a joke! Since when can the Golden Lion Legion not enter Frostwinter? When the messenger heard Colin's sarcasm, he lowered his head and did not say anything. Colin did not make things difficult for him. He was just a messenger. The situation in the city was obviously under Earl Amon's control. Along the way, they also found traces of the army. At that time, Colin guessed that it was the army of the Amon family. However, he did not expect them to take control of Frostwinter so easily. There must be someone in the city who cooperated with him. Who is the commander of Frostwinter's city defense force? Colin asked Scholar Dwayne, who was beside him. It's Knight Thomas St. Hilda. Scholar Dwayne seemed to know what Colin was thinking. After giving a name, he immediately shook his head and said, Knight Thomas is not biased. Earl Amon was able to take control of Frostwinter so quickly. He must have received help from someone else. Who else could have helped him? Scholar Dwayne thought for a while and said, it should be the butler of the house of St. Hilda, Drindon. Butler? Colin frowned as he thought of the old butler who was dressed in an old-fashioned way and didn't smile at Vera's coming-of-age ceremony. Why would he side with Joyce? Did the Duke of St. Hilda give him some orders before he left? Scholar Dwayne shook his head and said, I am not sure if the Duke gave him any orders. However, the reason why I'm guessing that he helped Count Amon is because I know that he is a fanatic. A fanatic? Colin immediately reacted. Even though Vera had been baptized in the church before, she had never been baptized and had never publicly acknowledged her faith in the God of Light. Therefore, in the eyes of the butler, Dudley, she was still a blasphemous mage, a heretic. At this moment, Colin realized that he had never considered the church's attitude. However, he could not be blamed for his lack of consideration. It was not that Scholar Dwayne did not mention it on purpose. It was just that the church had no say in the appointment of the Dukes of the North. The emperor needed the Pope's coronation, but the Duke did not. The royal family would never allow the church to influence the appointment and dismissal of their vassals. However, it was clear that the church would not just stand by and do nothing, especially when such an important title as the Dukes of the North was about to be inherited by a mage. Do you have any good ideas now? Colin asked Scholar Dwayne. The current situation was very tricky for Colin. It was impossible to take down a strong city like Winter Castle in a short period of time. The Menham family and the Dawson family had joined forces, and the dwarf army would soon catch up. If they did not deal with the Oman family in Winter Castle quickly, the Golden Lion Legion would face the danger of being attacked from both sides. Scholar Dwayne hesitated for a moment, but he looked seriously into Colin's eyes and said in a deep voice, Miss Vera can't enter the city. Colin was stunned. He felt that Scholar Dwayne was speaking nonsense. Winter Castle was under the control of Earl Amon, and Vera would be digging her own grave if she entered the city. However, he immediately realized that the messenger had invited him and Vera, but Scholar Dwayne had only said that Vera could not enter the city alone. So, are you suggesting that I enter the city? Yes. Scholar Dwayne nodded and added, if you allow me, I'll accompany you into the city. Scholar Dwayne wanted to tell Colin that he had no ulterior motives for his suggestion. In fact, Colin was not worried that Scholar Dwayne would deliberately set him up. At this point, even if Scholar Dwayne betrayed Colin, it would be impossible for him to win Joyce's trust. The power on the other side had already been divided up. Moreover, Vera and the Golden Lion Legion were outside the city. As long as Joyce still had some sense, he would not do anything to Colin. What will happen after we enter the city? Colin asked. Scholar Dwayne immediately said, we'll form an alliance. An alliance? Yes. If Joyce wants to sit on the throne of the Dukes of the North, his main enemy is the St. Thean family. In the current situation, we can use this opportunity to form an alliance with them. Let's first deal with the dwarf army before we make other plans. Colin rubbed his chin and thought for a long time before he finally nodded and said, "Okay, I'll follow you into the city." After that, he turned around and walked to a carriage behind him. Of course, if he wanted to enter the city, he would have to appease Vera first. After entering the carriage, Colin told Vera about his and Scholar Dwayne's plan. Originally, he thought that Vera would definitely object, and he had already prepared some arguments in advance. However, he did not expect that Vera would not reject Colin's proposal this time, even though she was worried and reluctant. "Okay, then you can go. If anything happens to you in the city, I will take revenge for you, even if I have to destroy the city and make the House of St. Hilda lose the northern frontier." After going through so many things, the naive girl had gradually become more mature. Colin smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry. Now that we have the St. Thean family outside, the people in the city will not provoke us if they are not stupid." Vera nodded gently and helped Colin to adjust the collar of his shirt. She then said emotionally, "Colin, you have done so much for the northern frontier. How can I thank you? You becoming one of the Dukes of the North is the best way to thank me." Of course, Colin wouldn't say this out loud. That would be too much of a killjoy. Looking at Vera's watery eyes, Colin chuckled and hugged her in his arms. He then said softly, "Marrying me is the best way to thank me." "Correct answer." Vera smiled sweetly, stood on her tiptoes, and gave her beloved man a kiss. After a moment of intimacy, Colin left the carriage. After that, he looked for Knight Cambonine and gave him some instructions. "Stay outside the city and pay attention to the movements of the dwarven army. If the enemy approaches, just hold your position and don't fight easily. In addition, after I enter the city, I will send someone to deliver a message every day. If we do not receive any message, then it means that we have met with an accident inside. You will follow Vera's orders when the time comes." "Yes, Sir Viscounts." After giving instructions to Knight Cambonine, Colin turned to the dazed wizard Cusius and asked him, "Mr. Cusius, have you been to the Winter City before?" "I have been here before." Cusius nodded and then shook his head. "But I have never been to the Lion's Roar Fortress." Colin laughed and invited him. "Now there is a good opportunity. Would you like to accompany me?" Wizard Cusius rolled his eyes and hesitated for a moment. But in the end, he nodded and said, "It would be my pleasure." Colin didn't want to let this mage, who was a friend or foe, stay outside the city. What if he caused some trouble around Vera? So, it was better to bring him into the city. Finally, Colin said a few more words to Knight Roger and then led 100 guards to the Winter City. With a dull roar, the huge steel city gate slowly opened a small gap for one person to pass through. Colin shook his head with a smile. The other party was really cautious. He collected his thoughts and immediately strode forward, taking the lead into the city. After entering the city, the first thing Colin saw was Earl Oman standing in front of him. After a year, Earl Oman looked much older, but his back was still straight and his eyes were still sharp, like a warrior who was unwilling to bow his head and admit defeat. "Viscount Angley, welcome to the Winter City." "Earl Oman, long time no see." Colin smiled and stepped forward to shake hands with him, as if they were old friends who had not seen each other for many years. "By the way, why don't I see Miss Vera?" Oman looked behind Colin and pretended to ask. "She is unwell and can't come." "I'm sorry." Colin casually made up a reason, and then changed the topic. "Your Excellency, I have a meeting gift for you." Earl Oman's eyes flashed. "You are too kind." Colin smiled and waved behind him. One of the guards came forward and took off his helmet. When Earl Oman saw the other party's face, he was shocked and his voice trembled. "What? Vala? Father?" Vala raised her head and exposed half of her face, which was burned beyond recognition by the fire, to the sunlight. Looking at this distorted face, Earl Oman could not help but tremble. The hatred in his eyes seemed to make the surrounding temperature drop by more than 10 degrees. He stepped forward slowly and hugged his illegitimate son in his arms. "Don't worry, I will avenge you, the Oman family, and the 300,000 people of Fallen Eagle City." Colin chuckled as he looked at the heartwarming scene of father and son reuniting. He teased, "Count Amon, are you satisfied with this greeting gift?" Count Alman let go of Vala and turned to Colin. "Viscount Angeli, I will definitely repay your kindness in the future," he said solemnly. Colin laughed and waved his hand. "I'm just joking. Knight Vala is my brother-in-law after all. It is my duty to save her. However, I am deeply sorry about the tragedy that happened in Fallen Eagle City. The St. Thean family's actions are really infuriating. Against such inhumane demons, we should work together and chase them out of the northern frontier." Earl Oman nodded, as if he agreed with Colin's opinion. However, he did not express his opinion verbally. Instead, he made an inviting gesture. "Viscount Angli, please. Young Master Joyce has been waiting for a long time." "All right." Colin strode forward. The steel gates behind him slowly closed, separating the inside and outside of the city into two worlds. Chapter 255. After entering the Lion's Roar Castle, Butler Drington personally brought Colin and the rest to a courtyard. "Lord Viscounts, please take a rest. After the banquet begins, I'll send someone to inform you." Since Joyce wasn't in a hurry to meet Colin, Colin couldn't appear to be in a hurry either. However, considering that the dwarf army was about to catch up, Colin couldn't afford to wait any longer. But Colin also understood that the more he couldn't afford to wait, the more he had to appear unhurried. Otherwise, he would be at a disadvantage in the following negotiations. Since he had nothing to do, Colin took off his armor, bathed, and changed into a noble's attire. In the evening, the sky suddenly turned gloomy, and night shrouded the land earlier than usual. Lightning flashed across the sky from time to time like dancing silver snakes, and thunderclaps exploded in the sky above chilly Winter City, causing the eardrums of the people to ache. Colin almost didn't hear the knocking on the door due to the roaring thunder. When he opened the door, he saw a young maid standing outside and respectfully inviting Colin to attend the banquet. Colin nodded. Together with Scholar Dwayne, they put on the raincoats that the maidservants had prepared for them and plunged into the storm. The storm made the guests of the banquet look disheveled. However, the banquet hall of the main castle was still bustling with noise and laughter. Even the thunderclaps couldn't drown it out. Colin took off his raincoat and handed it to a servant beside him. Then, he tidied his clothes and strode onto the thick wool carpet of the banquet hall. The soft and comfortable texture made Colin feel as though he was walking on clouds. In the banquet hall, 7 crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. The chandeliers in the center were 3 meters in diameter. The burning candles in the chandeliers illuminated every corner of the hall as though it was daytime. There was only a long table in the middle of the dark red carpet. The table was covered with a white apron, and there were all kinds of exquisite food and expensive red wine on it. There were also many knives and forks made of pure gold, as well as porcelain bowls and plates. A group of elegantly dressed gentlemen and noblewomen surrounded the table. When Colin walked in, they all cast inquisitive glances at him, as if they wanted to see what this Viscount Angli, who had recently risen to fame in the northern frontier, looked like. Colin didn't care about the curious gazes of the crowd and walked to the table. A smiling maid considerately handed over the tableware, and then softly asked Colin what he wanted. Colin glanced around the table and didn't see any deer blood wine. Of course, such a crude thing wouldn't appear on a formal banquet table. Disappointed, he casually picked up a few desserts. On the other hand, Wizard Cusius, who had followed along, filled himself up with a plate full of food in high spirits, causing the surrounding nobles to cast contemptuous glances at him from time to time. Especially when they saw Cusius' mage robes, their disgust was almost undisguised. However, Cusius seemed to have turned a blind eye to these gazes. He continued to pour himself a large glass of champagne and began to gorge himself. Colin didn't care about him and casually stood in a deserted corner, eating dessert while listening to Scholar Dwayne introduce the various people in the hall. Most of them were members of the House of St. Hilda, but they were all unimportant collateral relatives. Colin listened absent-mindedly and didn't remember many of them. There were only 2 people that made Colin's gaze pause for a moment. One was Knight Thomas St. Hilda, the commander of the city's defense forces. This time, the army of the Oman family was able to smoothly enter the city without the help of this person. The other was Nina St. Hilda, the daughter of the house of St. Hilda that Count Morrison wanted to marry. This cousin of Vera's was pretty, exuding the elegance and dignity of a noble lady. It was no wonder that Count Morrison had taken a fancy to her. Looking at the smiling Nina, Colin suddenly recalled the strange scene he saw under the bell tower of the Phoenix Butterfly Castle when he went to explore the Morrison family that night. He pondered in his heart whether he should destroy this marriage. Colin couldn't bear to push such a beautiful girl into the fire pit of the Morrison family. Moreover, stopping Nina from marrying into the Morrison family could also see how the Morrison family would react. If they were really anxious, then it meant that the blood pool under the clock tower was related to the daughters of St. Hilda who had been married over the years. Just as Colin was plotting against the Morrison family, Count Oman walked in, followed by Vala. However, Colin was surprised to find that Vala was wearing a viscount's robe. It seemed that after breaking off relations with the St. Thean family, Count Oman was determined to restore Vala's status as a legitimate son and confirm his inheritance rights. This banquet was also a good opportunity to officially introduce Vala to the nobles of the northern frontier. As if sensing Colin's gaze, Vala glanced at Colin before immediately looking away. "I didn't expect Vala to be Count Oman's true son." Scholar Dwayne seemed to have noticed some clues, and his tone was rather emotional. "Yes, who would have thought?" Colin said with a chuckle. Just as Count Oman was introducing all the noble ladies to his true son, the banquet hall suddenly fell silent. Just as Colin was puzzled, he saw a tall woman walk in from the entrance of the hall. Her chestnut-colored hair was soft and beautiful like silk, draping over her thin and fair shoulders. Her oval face was well-defined, and although she didn't have any makeup on, her perfect facial features and milk-white skin made her look even more elegant and refined. However, she had a pair of peach blossom eyes with a natural pink hue around them. The corners of her eyes were slightly upturned, and even if she wasn't smiling, she had a charming and bright smile. Her eyes were blurred and mesmerizing. Her entire body was shrouded in a loose priest robe. Only when she was walking would her exquisite curves be occasionally revealed. Her towering breasts, slender waist, full and round buttocks, as well as her slender legs, were faintly discernible, causing one's imagination to run wild. However, her expression was extremely devout, and her entire body emitted a holy radiance. She had an awe-inspiring and inviolable aura, just like an ascetic of the church. The natural seductiveness and the tranquility and holiness of water. These two contradictory qualities appeared on this female priest at the same time, mixing together to form a soul-stirring charm. For a moment, everyone present couldn't help but feel waves in their hearts. "Who is she?" Colin quietly swallowed his saliva and asked Scholar Dwayne. "The new Archbishop of the Northern Frontier, Pastor Ajani." Scholar Dwayne's voice was slightly hoarse, as if he was shocked by Ajani's beauty. "Such a young archbishop?" Colin looked at Scholar Dwayne in disbelief. One had to know that the position of archbishop was responsible for the entire Northern Frontier diocese, and this woman was only in her early 20s. Although age and ability were not necessarily proportional, in a perfect system, to be able to hold such a high position at such a young age was too shocking. Scholar Dwayne nodded seriously, indicating that he was not mistaken. "It is said that this archbishop is only 24 years old, but she is highly regarded by His Holiness the Pope. The speed of her promotion is simply astonishing. During this period of time, the situation in the Northern Frontier has been turbulent, and the Church's personnel changes in the Northern Frontier are just as intense. This Archbishop Ajani was only appointed at the beginning of this year." Colin's expression changed slightly, as if he had understood something. "So, this woman should be supporting Joyce?" "That should be the case." While he was gossiping with Scholar Dwayne, Colin was shocked to find that Archbishop Ajani was actually walking towards him. "Good evening, Viscount Angley." The beautiful female priest came before Colin, bowed, and then smiled sweetly. In that instant, it was as if a peacock had spread its tail, or a flower bloomed, and the entire banquet hall became brighter. The hearts of all the men present sped up, and their mouths went dry. They wished they could replace Colin and stand in front of this archbishop. But soon, Ajani's smile disappeared, and she returned to her original indifferent and distant expression, as if she was an angel that had descended to the mortal realm, looking down on her believers. "Good evening, Archbishop Ajani." Colin greeted her with a calm tone, but his heart was filled with infinite vigilance. This woman was as flirtatious as a poppy flower, filled with fatal temptation. If he was not careful, he might be pulled into an endless abyss at any time. No wonder she became an archbishop at such a young age. She was indeed powerful. "I heard that you are a benevolent lord. Not only do you provide food for the slaves during the famine, you also send people to teach the slave children." Ajani's voice was crisp and carried a trace of laziness, as if she was a young girl who had just woken up on a summer afternoon, acting coquettishly to her lover. Colin's gaze moved behind her, and indeed, he saw the figure of the retired bishop behind Ajani. These things were obviously told to Ajani by this former bishop of Icestone City, who was now the bishop of Chilly Winter City. "Archbishop, you flatter me. These are merely my duties as the Lord of Icestone City." Ajani was just about to speak when she saw a small figure walk in from the entrance of the hall. But it was this small figure that made all the nobles present bow in respect. Obviously, this was the current master of Lion's Roar Castle. Joyce St. Silda had arrived. Colin also hurriedly put down the plate in his hand and bowed to the host of today's banquet. At the same time, he glanced at the clock on the wall from the corner of his eye. This little guy was actually late. He didn't know if it was on purpose or Viscount Angley. Just as Colin was silently cursing, he actually heard Joyce call his name. "Young Master Joyce." Colin hurriedly stepped out of the line, feeling somewhat puzzled. Joyce raised his chin and said angrily, "You are too much." Colin's heart suddenly trembled. "HM? So exciting just from the beginning." Chapter 256. With Joyce's angry shout, the banquet hall suddenly quieted down. Everyone's gloating eyes instantly focused on Colin. They all wanted to see how this young but rapidly rising viscounts would deal with the anger of the Duke's third son. To be honest, Colin did not panic at all. After all, he was someone who had been on the battlefield and was used to seeing big scenes. Besides, compared to Duke St. Hilda's invincible godlike aura, Joyce was like a little lion who was only good for his looks and bluffing. Colin bowed slightly and placed his left hand on his chest. There was a trace of fear on his face as he said, "Young Master Joyce, I don't know what I have done wrong. Please enlighten me." Joyce slowly approached Colin. He deliberately slowed down his pace as if he wanted to create a sense of oppression. However, his thin and small figure did not give off much pressure. Moreover, Colin was much taller than him. Looking down from above, he seemed to be the one who had the upper hand. "The worst thing you have done is," Joyce said coldly, "you did not bring Sister Vera home." Colin looked up in surprise and saw that Joyce's little face had already changed into a mischievous smile. "I have not seen Sister Vera for a long time and I miss her very much. How could you not bring her to the Lion's Roar Fort this time?" Looking at the seemingly innocent little face in front of him, Colin suddenly felt that this third son of the Duke was a little interesting. Relying on his natural advantage as a child, he asked a very sharp question, giving Colin a show of strength. Although everyone knew the answer to this question, they all tacitly avoided answering it. As long as the Golden Lion Legion could not enter the city, then Vera would definitely not come in and walk right into the trap. This was something that everyone understood. However, at this time, Joyce's innocent question made Colin feel a little embarrassed. Was this little guy really talented or did someone teach him in advance? "Young Master Joyce, the reason why Vera could not enter the city is because she has a more important mission outside the city." "What mission?" Joyce pressed on, as if he was waiting for Colin to come up with an unreliable reason to counterattack. The corners of Colin's lips curled up as he said righteously, "Protect the body of the Duke of St. Hilda." "Father." A hint of panic flashed in Joyce's eyes, and he subconsciously turned to look at Butler Darrington. It seemed like the butler had taught him in advance. Colin felt slightly relieved. That would be much easier to deal with. Joyce seemed to realize that his behavior was inappropriate, so he immediately turned around and continued to question, "Then why didn't you let my sister bring father's body into the city?" The smile on Colin's face grew brighter as he asked in an innocent tone, "Young Master Joyce, do you know how I entered the city? How did you get in?" The young Joyce did not know that he was gradually walking into Colin's trap, and he was still in a daze as he tried to help him pass on the message. "When I was standing outside the city gate was only slightly open." Colin made a gesture with an indignant look on his face. "It was barely enough for one person to pass through. Young Master Joyce, are you sure you want to let the Duke of St. Hilda's coffin enter the city in this way?" Joyce was a little flustered. Butler Dington was about to interrupt when he saw the situation, but Colin did not give him the chance to do so. "The body of the former lord of the northern frontier is right outside the city. Shouldn't you open the city gate and personally lead the people of the House of St. Hilda out of the city to welcome him?" Joyce's forehead was already covered in cold sweat. He did not expect that he would be the one questioning Vera about why she did not dare to enter the city. How did Viscount Angley end up questioning him about why he did not dare to leave the city? Butler Dington sighed. He knew that he had underestimated the young Viscounts. Joyce was no match for him. Therefore, he had no choice but to step forward to resolve the situation personally. "Viscount Angley, why did I hear that there was something wrong with the body of the Duke outside the city?" Colin laughed and asked, "Mr. Butler, who did you hear this from?" "Knight Lewis," Butler Dington said. Then, Knight Lewis stepped out from the crowd. He first bowed to Joyce, then looked at Colin with a provocative gaze. His words were sharp as he said, "I saw the coffin brought by Viscount Angley with my own eyes, but there was only an ordinary stone statue placed inside. It was not the body of the Duke at all." As soon as he said this, there was another round of exclamations. Everyone began to turn around and whisper to each other. Colin seemed to have expected this and did not panic at all. He calmly explained, "That is because the Duke was petrified by a forbidden spell. That is why he looked like a stone statue." "This is just your side of the story." Knight Lewis was obviously determined to fight Colin to the end. "What about this evidence?" Colin smiled and took out a scroll from his arms. "This is the casting scroll for the forbidden spell. Do you want to show it to everyone?" "What?" Everyone saw that Colin really took out a casting scroll and their expressions changed. "How did you get the casting scroll for the forbidden spell?" Knight Lewis screamed again. Colin shrugged and pointed to Wizard Cusius, who was leisurely eating and drinking at the side. "Of course, it was given to me by Wizard Cusius, the deputy chairman of the Yule Mage Council." Cusius looked helplessly at Colin, as if blaming him for selling him out. Colin looked at Cusius with a smile as if to say, "Didn't you want to find more people to help you share the burden? Great, I will make it public now." Actually, Colin had thought it through carefully before making this move. Although the forbidden spell trials targeted at paladins was extremely terrifying, the conditions to release it were equally harsh. Not to mention the requirement of a rank 6 wizard, there was also the sacrifice of 300,000 lives. This kind of sacrifice was not easy to carry out. If not for the fact that Count Oman was leading his troops in battle and Fallen Eagle City was under the control of Penny and Mr. Chong, as well as the fact that they had taken advantage of the Tulip Merchant Guild's repairs to bury a large amount of coal in the city, Mr. Chong would never have been able to create such a terrifying scene. Just the burning of Fallen Eagle City alone would require the expenditure of a forbidden spell without the help of the coal laid in advance. Therefore, as long as the conditions to release Trials I were made public, it would greatly weaken the deterrence of the spell. After all, the major cities of the Radiant Empire were controlled by the nobles. Once they knew of this terrifying forbidden spell, they would definitely take precautions to prevent their cities from being sacrificed by the wizards. Facing the burning gazes of the nobles, Wizard Cusius could only nod and say, "Yes, this Trials I scroll was indeed given to Viscount Angley by me. I am also very sorry about what happened in Fallen Eagle City and apologize to everyone here. But please believe that the Yule Mage Council abhors this kind of inhumane forbidden spell. I guarantee that this kind of thing will never happen again." Colin looked at the awe-inspiring face of Wizard Cusius and was even more certain that this guy wanted to use him to clear his name. Once the forbidden spell trial's eye was released, Mr. Burr would definitely become the public enemy of the knights. Cusius reckoned that he did not have much confidence in Mr. Burr and wanted to use this method to draw a clear line between them so that he would not become the target of the knights. Seeing that Wizard Cusius had proven the authenticity of the scroll, the crowd instantly clamored and demanded to see the scroll in Colin's hands. Colin would of course not refuse and immediately passed the scroll to Butler Mendelden, asking him to pass it around for everyone to read. The nobles here basically knew some elven language. Although they might not be able to understand the principles behind this forbidden spell, and even more so, it was impossible for them to learn it. However, it was not a problem for them to understand the conditions and results of its casting. After everyone had read it, Colin looked in the direction of Viscounts Vala and winked. Viscounts Vala immediately understood what Colin meant and immediately stepped forward. As a witness, she recounted everything that happened on the night of the burning of Fallen Eagle City. With this witness, the crowd was even more convinced that Mr. Burr had indeed sacrificed Fallen Eagle City to release the trial's eye and petrified the Duke of St. Hilda. Moreover, because Viscounts Vala was now the son of Count Amon, his words were much more trustworthy. Moreover, in the eyes of the crowd, the Oman family was on the opposite side of the Angeli family, and Vala would not speak up for Colin. Knight Lewis knew that he could not continue to harp on this issue, and even began to suspect that the stone statue was really the Duke's corpse. Colin saw that the time was ripe and was about to suggest an alliance, but he did not expect Count Oman to beat him to it and step forward to call out loudly. Everyone, Mr. Burr sacrificed an entire city of innocent people and brazenly killed the Duke of St. Hilda. This is an unforgivable crime. Against such a public enemy of the northern frontier, we should unite and kill him together. Colin was stunned, clearly not expecting Count Oman to steal his line. However, he immediately followed up with the other party's words. That's right. In the current situation, we should set aside our differences and unite against the enemy. Young Master Joyce, please open the city gates and let the soldiers of the Golden Lion Legion escort the Duke's corpse into the city. Enter the city? Why must we enter the city? Before Joyce could speak, Earl Amon stood up and objected. Facing an enemy attack, we should take the initiative to attack, not hide in the city. Viscount Angley, I heard that you defeated the Pegasus Legion in Silvermoon City and annihilated an army of 100,000 trolls in the Firmament Ice Plains. Now, do you dare to fight alongside me and attack the invading Dwarven army? Only a fool would be willing to fight alongside you. Colin thought to himself. He knew that Count Amon was unwilling to let the Golden Lion Legion into the city, but he did not expect him to take the initiative to fight outside the city. Colin did not know what the other party was planning, but he definitely did not want to fight alongside someone with ulterior motives. But before he could object, Archbishop Akani said righteously, "You're right. Could take the initiative to attack without fear of danger. This is the responsibility of a lord of the northern frontier. I will personally pray for you. May the God of light watch over you and bestow upon you courage, wisdom, and undefeatable faith." The moment this beautiful archbishop spoke, Colin realized that he could no longer bring up the suggestion of defending the city and avoiding the brunt of the attack. Otherwise, wouldn't he be admitting that he was not qualified to be a lord of the northern frontier? He rolled his eyes and suddenly said with a smile, "Good. Then let the God of light bear witness to us defeating the enemy together." Smack. Colin and Count Amon raised their right hands at the same time and struck each other heavily. A temporary alliance was thus established. Chapter 257. Kaboom! Lightning streaked across the sky, and the torrential rain in chilly winter city intensified. After the banquet ended, Colin returned to his residence. Just as he closed the door, Scholar Dwayne immediately said, "Lord Viscounts, it's not a wise decision to go out of the city to fight." Colin did not immediately respond to Scholar Dwayne. Instead, he unhurriedly loosened his tight collar, took off his coat, and threw it on the back of the chair. Then he smiled and asked, Why do you think Earl Amon suggested going out of the city with me to fight the enemy? Scholar Dwayne was slightly taken aback. He didn't expect Colin to ignore his advice and be troubled by this question. However, he explained patiently, first, Earl Amon definitely doesn't want the Golden Lion Legion to enter the city. That's his bottom line. After all, the Golden Lion Legion has more people and is stronger than the Oman family. Once they enter the city, the Lion's Roar Fort will have a change of hands. As for why he wants to go out of the city to fight the enemy, it's probably because he wants to make use of this opportunity to gain military merits. Although the House of St. Hilda has accepted Earl Amon's surrender and forgiven his betrayal, this is based on the fact that they are facing a powerful enemy. If the northern frontier is pacified, the Oman family might not be able to escape punishment. There's no need to find an excuse for punishment. According to the Overlord's law, if the Oman family loses their fief, they can be stripped of their title. Furthermore, Fallen Eagle City had already been burned to ashes. Even if Count Aldman wanted to take back his fief, it was already impossible. Under such circumstances, the only way for him to save himself is to gain military merits in the process of pacifying the rebel army to ensure his title and status. Therefore, he won't accept our proposal to defend the city and make peace with the dwarves. Colin nodded and agreed with Scholar Dwayne's judgment. Then he raised another question. Then he asked, what happens after we defeat the rebel army? If we really fight with the dwarven army outside the city? Even if we win, how does Count Aldman plan to deal with the aftermath? Will he continue to block the Golden Lion Legion outside the city? Isn't he afraid that I'll take care of him? I don't know what Count Oman and the others are planning. Scholar Dwayne shook his head with a grave expression. However, I'm guessing that they're still going to use the Duke's body to make an issue out of it. Colin also narrowed his eyes, realizing that this should be the biggest flaw on his side. Scholar Dwayne continued his analysis. The matter of the Duke's body being swapped is full of doubts. I even suspect that the Morrison family has already pledged their loyalty to Joyce in advance. Of course, it was also possible that the church was the middleman. This Archbishop Ajani, I can't quite see through her. Think about it. If Ajani suddenly questions the authenticity of the Duke's body during his funeral in the future, it will be a fatal blow to both Vera's and your reputation. Colin rubbed his chin and felt that there was indeed such a possibility. After thinking for a moment, he asked again, then can Archbishop Ajani be roped in? Scholar Dawn shook his head with a heavy expression. Colin asked curiously, why? Doesn't the church just want to see an obedient Dukes of the North? Whatever Joyce can give, Vera can give as well. Moreover, I can also persuade Vera to publicly announce her belief in the God of Light. If a mage converts to the God of Light, won't the church be tempted by such a publicity stunt? Scholar Dawn shook his head and asked, Lord Viscounts, do you know why the church sent such a young and beautiful archbishop to the northern frontier? Scholar Dawn did not answer directly. Instead, he asked again, do you know Lady Kate? Colin was confused. She is the wife of the Earl of the Eastern Region. At the same time, she is also a priest and the Archbishop of the Eastern Region. Colin instantly understood what Scholar Dawn meant. The church was actually using a honey trap. So, the real purpose of Archbishop Ajani is to marry Joyce and become the Lady of the Dukes of the North? Scholar Dawn nodded and said, yes, because of Lady Kate, the church has a very deep influence in the Eastern Region. They can even influence some of the decisions of the Duke of the Eastern Region. After tasting the sweetness in the Eastern Region, the church has been trying to use the same method to expand their influence in the secular world. This time, Archbishop Ajani's target should be Joyce. Colin could not help but laugh. The church was really trying to use a honey trap on a 10-year-old boy. However, this trick might be useful. With Ajani's charm, it would be very easy for her to control a little boy. In retrospect, Colin found that Joyce had indeed been constantly looking at Ajani during the banquet. Apparently, he had been attracted to her. In this way, between Vera and Joyce, the church would definitely choose the latter. How could a converted mage be more attractive than the Duchess? Phew. Colin let out a long breath and returned to the main topic. So, what good idea do you have now? Scholar Dawn's spirit was lifted and he quickly said, "Lord Viscounts, the strategy we set at the beginning cannot be changed. Not only will we not win if we go out to meet the enemy, but even if we win, I'm afraid that Joyce will take away the fruits of our labor. So, we must adhere to the original principles. We must not confront the rebels directly and defend Chilly Winter. Then we can slowly divide and conquer the rebels." Colin spread out his hands and said helplessly, "But now, they will not agree to let the Golden Lion Legion enter the city." Scholar Dawn's eyes flashed and he said fiercely, "Lord Viscounts, then we must take extreme measures." "What extraordinary means?" Colin's interest was piqued. Scholar Dawn said word by word, "Force your way into the city." "You can't just attack, right?" "No." Scholar Dawn shook his head. Scholar Dawn shook his head. "Currently, Chilly Winter's Gate is still controlled by the City Defense Army. As long as we persuade Knight Thomas, we can open the gate and let the Golden Lion Legion enter the city. As long as the Golden Lion Legion enters the city, Earl Amon will obediently give up his dominance and try to reconcile with us. Of course, even if he wants to fight to the death, we will not be afraid with the Golden Lion Legion and the City Defense Army." Colin leaned forward slightly and asked eagerly, "Are you confident that you can persuade Knight Thomas?" Scholar Dawn nodded confidently. "I have already noticed during the banquet that Knight Thomas is not very close to Earl Amon and the others. He must have been forced to board the ship." Colin frowned. "But since he has already boarded the ship, it will be difficult for you to get him to come down." Scholar Dawn smiled mysteriously. "At this time, we will have to rely on Miss Vera's background." "What do you mean?" Colin's eyes flashed as he suddenly realized something. "Do you know who Vera's biological father is?" Colin looked at the mysterious Scholar Dwayne and suddenly burst into laughter. Scholar Dawn was stunned for a moment before he reacted and laughed. "Sir Viscounts, it seems that you already know." Colin nodded. "I found out about it from Marquis Garcia." "How did you find out?" "The Duke of St. Hilda told me." Colin was a little surprised. It seemed that the Duke really trusted Scholar Dawn. He even told him such a secret. "Then, do you know who Vera's biological mother is?" Colin suddenly asked curiously. Unfortunately, Scholar Dawn shook his head, indicating that he did not know. Colin was a little disappointed, and then he asked in confusion, "Vera's biological father is Marquis Garcia. What does she have to do with Knight Thomas?" Scholar Dawn smiled and said, "Sir Viscounts, you may not know this, but Knight Thomas used to be a member of the Black Cavalry. He followed Marquis Garcia and fought in the Blue Ice Field for more than 10 years. Therefore, if he knows that Vera is Marquis Garcia's biological daughter, then he will definitely help us." Colin suddenly realized that Scholar Dawn was a fan of Marquis Garcia. However, when he thought about it, it was normal. With Marquis Garcia's prestige in the army, it would be strange if he did not have any fans. "Well, then you can go and find him now." "Yes, Sir Viscounts. Please wait for my good news." Scholar Dawn smiled confidently, then he went out, picked up his raincoat, and rushed into the rain. Chapter 258. Chilly Winter Castle was pitch black as a storm engulfed the area. From time to time, lightning would pierce through the sky, leaving shocking marks on the night sky, followed by deafening thunder. The Lion's Roar Castle, which was located at the top of the mountain, was in the eye of the storm. The violent storm was about to turn the magnificent castle into ashes. Scholar Dwayne put on a raincoat and walked out of the Lion's Roar Castle toward the north gate. He had just arrived at Knight Thomas's residence when he was informed by a servant that after the banquet, Knight Thomas didn't return to his room to rest. Instead, he was on duty at the north gate. Scholar Dwayne had no choice but to brave the heavy rain and rush to the north gate in the pitch-black night. Because of the curfew and the heavy rain, the streets were empty. Even the taverns that were usually lively had closed their doors early. Along the way, he encountered a few patrolling soldiers. After revealing his identity, Scholar Dwayne wasn't harassed. But in front of the church of Chilly Winter Castle, Scholar Dwayne stopped in his tracks. The church was brightly lit, and faint sounds of prayers could be heard. A group of soldiers was guarding the door. Scholar Dwayne recognized them with the help of the lights in the church. They were the personal guards of Knight Thomas. Scholar Dwayne's heart sank. He hesitated for a while, but he still walked over and asked, "Is Knight Thomas in the church?" The leader of the personal guards recognized Scholar Dwayne and nodded. "Yes, Scholar Dwayne. Lord Thomas is inside." Scholar Dwayne suppressed the uneasiness in his heart and walked into the church. "Amazing grace, how sweet! My sins have been forgiven. Such grace fills me with reverence and comfort. Praise me with joy. Before my Father, lead me home." The choir was singing hymns. The melodious singing had a soothing power, and it seemed to cover the sound of the storm outside. The structure of the church's main hall had been specially designed. The singing reverberated and brewed inside as if it was the voice of heaven. Scholar Dwayne squinted his eyes and searched the crowd, but he didn't see Knight Thomas. "Good evening, Scholar Dwayne." Scholar Dwayne turned his head and saw the Bishop Emeritus standing behind him with a smile. The Bishop Emeritus looked at him calmly. "Good evening, Bishop Emeritus. Scholar Dwayne, are you here to pray?" Scholar Dwayne smiled and nodded. "Yes, I'm restless at night and can't sleep. So I'm here to bathe in the glory of the Lord, hoping to obtain a moment of peace." The Bishop Emeritus said warmly, "May the Lord's gaze upon you and soothe your restless heart." Seeing that the Emeritus Bishop was about to leave, Scholar Dwayne hurriedly asked, "By the way, when I came in, I saw Knight Thomas's personal guard at the door. Is he here too?" The Bishop Emeritus nodded. "Knight Thomas Dwayne. And confess. Do you have matters? Dwayne. I'm just asking. All right, if you need anything else, please feel free to look for me. Dwayne, Dwayne. Bye." Scholar Dwayne, and the of the scholars of Dwayne to he, Bishop of Dwayne. Dwayne to Dwayne, the of Scholar Dwayne of Scholar of. Colin tossed and turned in bed, unable to fall asleep. All kinds of messy thoughts were constantly emerging in his mind. He was worried about Vera's safety outside the city. He was also thinking about Queen Aisha, whom he had not seen for a long time. He was also thinking about the banquet that had just ended. He was thinking about the beautiful but holy priestess. Even the mature and beautiful Queen Medela somehow got into Colin's mind. "But, beast," Colin scolded himself and then began to compare which beauty had the longest legs. After a long time, the sound of rain outside the window suddenly became a lot lighter. Colin, who could not sleep, got up and went out of the door. It was dark outside the house, and only a few sentries in the castle flickered sporadically. The most violent storm seemed to have passed, and now there was only the end of the rain. Colin walked casually along the dimly lit corridor. He could not help but began to worry about Scholar Dwayne. He did not know if he could persuade Knight Thomas. Although Marquis Garcia used to be the god of war on the northern frontier, he was now a prisoner of the eastern region. Would Knight Thomas still respect and worship him like before? Thinking of Marquis Garcia, Colin suddenly realized that the date of exchange of prisoners was approaching. At that time, the reason why he had delayed the exchange of prisoners was because of the rebellion in the northern region, which made it impossible for him to escape. He thought that 3 months would be enough to stabilize the situation on the northern frontier, but now it seemed that he had underestimated the complexity of the situation. According to this situation, he was afraid that the exchange of prisoners would be delayed again. The Duke of the Eastern region was eager for Marquis Garcia to return to the northern frontier later. After all, the more chaos there was, the more they would gloat. While his thoughts were running wild, Colin suddenly smelled a familiar fragrance. It was like a rose after the summer rain, mixed with the vegetation in the forest in the early morning, and then gently crushed, releasing a scent that refreshed the heart and refreshed the mind. Turning a corner, Colin saw the owner of the fragrance. It was Archbishop Ajani. "Good evening, Your Excellency Archbishop." Colin slightly bowed and performed a gentleman's salute. "Good evening, Viscount Angley." Ajani was still wearing her white priest robe. Her big eyes seemed to be able to speak as she stared straight at Colin. Colin's mouth was dry from the other side's examining and charming gaze. He had to deliberately find a topic to talk about. "You didn't go back to the church tonight?" "I was delayed by the rainstorm and was now preparing to go back." Ajani's tone was cold. She waved the book in her hand and added, "Just now I had nothing to do, so I explained a section of the Book of Radiance to Master Joyce." Colin did not know why, but he suddenly felt a little jealous of that little brat. Ajani did not seem to be in a hurry to leave. Instead, she stood there and asked, "Viscounts, what about you? It's so late, why aren't you sleeping?" Colin casually said, "The thunder just now was too loud. I couldn't sleep." Ajani smiled in surprise and said softly, "Your heart is in a mess." Saying so, she used her right hand to make a praying gesture in front of her chest. She then took a few steps forward and extended her index finger to lightly touch Colin's forehead. At this moment, the two of them were very close. Colin could already feel Ajani's warm and moist breath lightly hitting his face. Her dark red lips seemed to carry an endless temptation, making Colin almost unable to control himself and take a bite. But when Ajani's index finger touched Colin's forehead, a calm and peaceful emotion instantly calmed all the restlessness in his heart and body. In a daze, the Ajani in front of him seemed to emit a holy radiance, making Colin have an impulse to prostrate himself in worship. Ajani's index finger left Colin's forehead, but she did not back away. The upper bodies of the two were almost touching, their breaths mingling, their gazes moving. But at this moment, Colin did not have any evil thoughts in his heart, as if it was blasphemy to the woman in front of him. "Are you feeling better?" Ajani asked softly, the concern in her eyes intoxicating. "Yes, much better." Colin smiled and thanked her. Ajani stretched out her hand to tidy her hair, suddenly praising, "Viscount Angley, you are the knight with the most potential I have ever seen." "Is that so?" Colin raised his eyebrows. He did not know if this archbishop was praising him from the bottom of her heart, or out of politeness, or because of some unspeakable conspiracy. Ajani nodded solemnly, "I can feel the holy light's favor and closeness to you. I presume that your faith in the God of light must be abnormally firm and devout." "What the hell?" A certain non-believer was suddenly speechless. Thinking of how he had even used the name of the God of light to deceive his blood descendants, Colin could not help but doubt the effectiveness of the Church's method of identifying heresy. Of course, on the surface, Colin must have had a sincere expression. "Yes, ever since I was baptized and became a knight, I swore to serve the God of light for life, to sweep away all evil for him." Ajani seemed to be very satisfied with Colin's declaration. She leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between the two. Her tone also had a hint of charm. "Then, are you willing to be a little closer to the God of light?" Colin's heart raced again, his mouth dry as he asked, "How do I get closer?" "The Knights Templar, I can recommend you to join." Knights Templar? Colin suddenly felt a chill, blood rushing back to his brain, reason taking over the high ground once again. He immediately said resolutely, "I appreciate your kindness, but I am not ready to abandon everything and serve the God." The so-called Knights Templar was the strongest armed force in the hands of the Church. It was made up entirely of knights and had extremely strong combat power. However, to join the Knights Templar, one had to give up all worldly wealth, titles, and territory, and fight wholeheartedly for the God of Light. Colin was obviously not foolish enough to do such a thing. Although Ajani was beautiful, it was not enough to make him lose his reason. "That's a pity." Ajani's brows furrowed slightly, the worry on her face making one's heart ache. "However, the God has plans for every believer. I have always felt that you should belong to the Knights Templar." "You should belong to the Knights Templar. Your whole family should belong to." Colin cursed inwardly. This Ajani's last words sounded like a threat. "Then we will wait patiently for the God's arrangements." Colin smiled and took a step back, widening the distance between the two. Ajani blinked and stared fixedly at Colin for a long time. Suddenly, she pointed out, "Don't try to resist your destiny. That will only cause you to distance yourself from the God of Light." After saying this, the beautiful and bewitching archbishop quietly left. Only a faint fragrance remained in the air, teasing Colin's heartstrings. Chapter 259. Boom. The sudden explosion of thunder reverberated in the sky above chilly winter, waking up countless sleeping creatures. Scholar Dwayne, who was dozing off in the pew of the church, was jolted awake. He felt a violent tremor beneath his feet, as though something had fallen from a height and crashed onto the ground. Ah! A sharp cry rang out in the church, interrupting the melodious hymn. Scholar Duane, who had yet to recover from his shock, felt his heart skip a beat. What happened? Scholar Duane looked in the direction of the sound and saw that the left wing of the church was shrouded in smoke and dust. Collapsed! Collapsed! Another scream was heard. Only then did Scholar Duane discover that the entire ceiling of the side hall had collapsed. The church was in a mess. All sorts of screams, cries were heard, and the noise was distracting. Quiet! Don't panic! Save the people first! The voice of the emeritus bishop was heard, and everyone calmed down. Scholar Duane was hesitating if he should help when he saw the city defense army soldiers outside the church charge over in a frenzy. Lord Thomas! Lord Thomas! Looking at the soldiers who were frantically digging in the ruins, Scholar Duane suddenly realized that the confessional was over there. Could it be? At this thought, Scholar Duane couldn't remain calm and rushed over. Boom! Thunder boomed, and the rainstorm that had stopped for a while poured down again. It was as though the rainstorm would drown chilly winter. In the church, the rescuers were drenched. They moved away the rubble and found the first corpse. It wasn't Knight Thomas. Scholar Duane heaved a sigh of relief. The light of hope in his heart hadn't been extinguished, so he quickly went back to the rescue. Soon they dug out 3 more corpses and the first survivor. It was a pity that Knight Thomas wasn't among them. Thomas's personal guards were also going crazy. Their hands were already bleeding from the rubble, but they still didn't stop digging. Finally, they managed to dig out their commanding officer. His corpse. Plop. Scholar Duane sat down on the wet ground, his eyes filled with fear. What's going on? Why did the ceiling collapse? Thomas's personal guards couldn't accept the truth. They pestered the emeritus bishop and questioned him. I'm afraid it was caused by lightning strike? Scholar Duane sneered. How could there be such a coincidence? It just so happened to hit the ceiling of the side chamber of the church and killed Knight Thomas, who was confessing? Furthermore, Thomas was a knight of the 4th step. Even if he was hit by a boulder, he might not necessarily die. Scholar Duane did not perform an autopsy. Firstly, he did not know anything about autopsies. Secondly, it was meaningless to dwell on it. He was still 1 step too late. Thomas was dead. Then his plan would be foiled. Thinking of this, Scholar Duane hurriedly got up from the ground and walked quickly towards the Lion's Roar Fort, ignoring the howling storm outside. Lion's Roar Fort. Colin stood in the corridor and stared blankly at the increasingly heavy rain outside. The fragrance that Ajani had left behind seemed to linger around his nose, but he was not thinking about her charming face. Instead, he was pondering over the last words she had left behind. When she said those words, Ajani appeared very confident, as if Colin could no longer escape from the palm of her hand. This made Colin feel slightly uneasy. Time passed little by little, and the uneasiness in Colin's heart grew stronger. Moreover, Scholar Duane had been gone for so long, but there was still no news from him. This made Colin feel even more ominous. I can't wait any longer. Although Colin still trusted Scholar Duane, he did not want to place all his hopes on him. Moreover, Colin had his own plans for entering the city this time. He still had a trump card by Count Amon's side. Rumble. A bolt of lightning tore through the dark night, and the rumbling of thunder made one's scalp go numb. Faintly, Colin seemed to hear some noise coming from outside the castle. At this time, he was no longer in the mood to pay attention to these things. After making up his mind, he left with large strides. Boom. A violent gust of wind rushed through the corridor, as if something had suddenly charged into the rain. Sir Count, I just received news that the side chamber of the Radiance Church collapsed, crushing more than 10 people to death. Among them was Knight Thomas. I understand. Count Amon nodded, his face calm, as if he had already expected Knight Thomas's death. Putting on his coat, Count Amon left his residence. He had only taken a few steps when he saw Viscount Vala walking over. Father. Count Amon nodded with a smile. It's already so late and you're still awake? The thunder tonight is too loud, I can't sleep. Father, are you preparing to go out? Count Amon nodded, and then said, Since you can't sleep, come with me to see young Master Joyce. Viscount Vala was stunned, and said hesitantly, Father, it's so late, to disturb young Master Joyce isn't too good, right? Count Amon sighed and said helplessly, There's no choice. The church collapsed just now, and Knight Thomas was unfortunately killed. We have to let young Master Joyce know about this, and appoint a new commander for the city guards. Thomas was killed? Vala was shocked, and only came back to her senses after a while. She carefully approached Count Amon, and whispered, Father, this shouldn't be an accident, right? Count Amon smiled mysteriously, and patted his son's shoulder, but did not give a clear answer. At this moment, a huge figure suddenly appeared at the corner of the corridor. His entire body was covered in thick blue armor, and gave off a strong sense of oppression. But strangely, his footsteps were extremely light, as if he had suddenly appeared there like a ghost. Count Amon frowned, as if it was strange that there was no such person among the guards of the house of St. Hilda. Suddenly, Count Amon felt a sharp pain in his waist. Bam! He sent the ambusher flying with a kick, but Count Almon's face was filled with confusion and shock. Why? Count Amon's body trembled uncontrollably, but not because of his injuries, but because of the greater pain in his heart. He could not understand why he had been assassinated one after another, and the assassins were all people he trusted. Lawrence, Penny, Cynthia, and now even his own son, Vala, wanted to kill him. For a moment, Count Amon felt as if everyone had betrayed him, as if the entire world wanted to be his enemy. But he quickly calmed down, and even guessed the mastermind behind this assassination. Vala was a meeting gift from Colin, and it was obvious that this assassination was ordered by Colin. Count Amon could not understand how Colin had ordered Vala to kill his own father, but he felt as if he had been caught in a trap of his own making. Perhaps this greeting gift was also a return gift. A year ago, Count Amon ordered Knight Carter to assassinate Colin in Grey Castle. A year later, Colin ordered Vala to assassinate Count Amon in Lion's Roar Castle. Perhaps this was fate. Vala slowly spat out a mouthful of blood. Count Aldman's counterattack had been quite fierce, causing his chest to cave in. However, there was not a hint of panic on his face, nor was there any regret. Instead, there was only bone-deep hatred. Because you deserve to die. Vala growled with a ferocious expression. For your own selfish reasons, you did not hesitate to invite a wolf into the house. Mother's early death, the pain I suffered in the first half of my life, the chaos in the northern frontier, and the 300,000 innocent lives in Fallen Eagle City, it was all because of you. Count Amon was stunned. He wanted to refute, but he realized that in the face of his own son's betrayal, any explanation was useless. All the schemes of the past flashed past his mind, and a trace of regret appeared, but was immediately suppressed by Count Amon. His face became resolute once more. He did not regret it. So what if everyone had betrayed him? So what if the world was his enemy? How could one not pay a price if they wanted to reach the peak of power? Count Amon pulled out the dagger at his waist and threw it forward. In front of him, the huge blue-armored man who had suddenly appeared had already sped up. The huge shield in his hand flickered with a dark blue luster, as if he wanted to crush everything in front of him. At the same time, a red-armored man appeared behind Count Amon, but compared to the huge figure in front of him, this one was very small. However, the huge hammer in his hand made it clear that he was not an easy opponent. Count Amon quickly pulled out his sword and shouted loudly, "Let's go! Viscount Angley, do you dare show yourself and fight me?" Chapter 260. Boom, boom, boom. The massive blue-armored man approached Count Aldman, and with each step, his footsteps grew heavier. In the end, each step seemed to cause the earth to shake. His speed was also raised to the maximum. His entire body was like a cannonball that had been shot out of the barrel, drawing out a dull whistling sound in the air. The dagger that Count Aldman had thrown out seemed to have encountered an avalanche, and was instantly drowned. The few personal guards beside him looked at the giant blue armored man in front of them and did not dare to move forward. Thus, they turned around and attacked the short red armored man behind them, as if they thought that he was a pushover. Unfortunately, they soon realized that they were wrong. Bang! The giant hammer in the red armored man's hand swept out without any fancy moves, and the first guard that it hit instantly let out a painful howl. The long sword in his hand immediately shattered, and a terrifying force was transmitted through his arm, entering his body like a flood. In an instant, all his organs and flesh were crushed. Poof! His blood pressure exploded through his blood vessels and skin, and blood spurted out from his body, filling the air with a bloody mist. The other personal guards seemed to have been scared silly by their comrade's condition, and for a moment, they did not move. The red armored man did not show any mercy. He immediately charged forward, smashing the heads of Count Aldman's personal guards one by one, as though he was smashing rats. On the other side, Count Aldman faced the blue armored man charging at him like a cannonball. He took a deep breath, and his body began to swell. Golden holy light seeped out of his body, and the long sword in his hand condensed into a cross rune. Rumble! The golden long sword clashed with the blue shield, and an invisible sonic boom exploded in the shape of a disc. Cracks appeared on the walls and pillars of the corridor like a spider web, as if the corridor was going to collapse in the next second. Count Aldman and the blue armored man were locked in a stalemate for 3 seconds, and then he retreated a few steps with a pained expression. The opponent's terrifying strength shocked him, but at the same time, he felt a sense of familiarity. This was clearly the mysterious person who had ambushed him a few days ago, causing the Aldman family's army to howl. But he was not human. Count Aldman had already recognized the opponent's strength attribute. Hidden under the blue armor was clearly a troll warrior. A tier 5 troll warrior. Even more questions arose. How did Colin get such a high-level troll warrior to work for him? But the troll warrior didn't give Count Aldman any time to think or catch his breath. He swung his shield and smashed at him again. Bang, bang, bang. Count Oman did not dare to take it head-on, constantly dodging. The solid granite floor was smashed into deep pits, and the entire corridor shook as if it could collapse at any moment. The guards of the House of St. Hilda were also alarmed and were rushing over, but they were stopped by the red-armored men who had already taken care of Count Allman's personal guards. The giant hammer swung with a terrifying force. The slightest graze would cause skin and flesh to split open, and the slightest touch would cause a skull to break. Rumble! The pillars of the promenade finally couldn't withstand the destruction and collapsed. Earl Oman had already predicted the collapse, and had rushed out in advance. The torrential rain drenched Count Allman's entire body, and the wound on his back continued to bleed. His body's temperature and strength seemed to be draining away along with the blood, and the cold rain made the loss even faster. He had to end the battle as soon as possible. Count Allman's heart was heavy. Boom! From the collapsed ruins, a blue figure rushed out at an extremely fast speed, drawing a straight trajectory in the air. The thick curtain of rain seemed to have been torn open, and the blue armored man charged at Count Allman without mercy. Holy light shield! Count Allman held his sword with both hands, standing straight in front of him. A semicircle of light spread out from his sword. Bang! The two of them once again collided, and the falling rain seemed to boil, exploding in all directions. A vacuum sphere was formed at the center of the collision. Holy shadow descent! Count Allman roared, his eyes turning pure gold, cold and without a shred of human emotion or reason. Large amounts of golden holy light surged out from his body, gathering on the sword in his hand. The sword flashed with a blinding golden light, illuminating the dark night sky. The guards of the House of St. Hilda who had rushed over felt their vision being filled with gold, and could not see anything. A vast aura spread out, as if wanting to cleanse the world of all evil. A golden sword light flashed. Night fell once more, and the rain continued to wreak havoc. Everything returned to normal, as if that destructive golden light was just an illusion. But reality proved that it was not an illusion. With a crisp sound, the blue armored man's huge shield was split in two, and even his entire right arm was severed, falling to the ground. But strangely, no blood spurted out from the wound. Even the armored man stood there in a daze, completely unaffected by the injury. It was as if it was not his arm that had been cut off. Just as Count Alman was puzzled, the blue armored man moved again. His remaining left hand pulled out a long blade, and he actually slashed at Count Alman again. Count Alman felt his heart go numb. Was this troll warrior crazy? Having just used his ultimate move, Count Alman felt his entire body go soft, and the wound on his back was still throbbing with pain. Who dares to behave so atrociously in the Lion's Roar castle? At this moment, a loud voice could be heard from afar. Count Alman's expression immediately turned from despair to ecstasy, because he could tell that it was the captain of the guards of the Lion's Roar castle, Knight Chester. That was also a knight of the 5th step. Count Alman was about to shout, but the blue armored man's sharp blade forced his words back into his stomach. However, his mind relaxed. The blue armored man in front of him was much less threatening now that he had lost an arm. He only needed to wait for Knight Chester to arrive. As for the other red armored man, he was currently being held back by the guards of the House of St. Hilda. Count Alman's heart skipped a beat, because he saw that the red armored man had already shaken off the guards, and was rushing towards him. Count Alman did not dare to be careless, and immediately forced the blue armored man to retreat with his sword, before rushing towards Knight Chester. At this moment, Count Alman suddenly felt a strange gust of wind above his head. Raising his head, he was shocked to find that a large figure was right above him. The shadow of a 12-meter-long bat wings completely enveloped him. Count Alman stabbed out with his sword, but the opponent nimbly dodged it. Then, a pair of steel-like hands reached out from above, grabbing Count Alman's shoulders. Pucci. The 10 fingers were like knives, piercing deeply into Count Alman's shoulders. Bang. The blue armored man caught up from behind, and used the back of his blade to smash Count Alman's waist. With an ear-piercing sound of bones breaking, Count Alman's spine was completely broken. Count Alman let out a painful howl. Chester. Save me. Stop. Put him down. Knight Chester held his spear, and like a golden lightning bolt, he pierced through the rain, charging towards Count Alman. Bang. The large bat wings stirred up a violent gust of wind, and Colin immediately brought Count Alman into the air. Knight Chester also stomped heavily on the ground, and his entire body flew up as well. However, the red armored man's large hammer blocked his way. Clang. The spear and the hammer collided, and in an instant, a gust of wind blew, piercing the ears. Knight Chester landed firmly on the ground, but his eyes became extremely serious. At this moment, Colin had already brought Count Alman into the air, disappearing into the night. The blue armored man calmly turned around to pick up the broken arm on the ground, and together with the red armored man, they quickly retreated out of the castle. Knight Chester's expression changed. He wanted to give chase, but he was hesitant. Count Alman had already been taken away by that strange flying man, and the remaining 2 were of the 5th step. They were clearly not easy to deal with, and Knight Chester did not want to risk his life for no reason. The 2 armored men in front of him were about to go further and further away when there was a sudden commotion in the ruins. Vala crawled out pathetically, crying out pitifully. Father! Lord Chester, please save my father. Knight Chester sighed helplessly, but did not move. Seeing that the captain of the guards did not move, the guards of the House of St. Hilda who had rushed over naturally stopped as well. Very quickly, the 2 figures, one red and one blue, completely disappeared into the pitch-black night. The torrential rain continued to fall, and very quickly, the blood on the ground was washed clean, as if the massacre had never happened. Chapter 261. At the darkest moment before dawn, the torrential rain that had engulfed Winter Castle finally stopped. In an abandoned warehouse that was so dark that he couldn't even see his own fingers, Count Amon was panting with difficulty. Every time he breathed, he would bleed. His broken spine made him unable to feel his lower body, but the pain in his upper body was enough to make him faint. But Earl Amon forced himself not to faint. He was still trying his best to find a glimmer of hope. Colin, I know it's you, right? Count Almond's eyes were fixed on the figure in front of him. Even though he could not see the face hidden in the darkness, even though this person's figure was completely different from Colin's, Count Almond was certain that this person was Colin Angeli. Colin half-squatted in front of Erlemon and chuckled, "Why are you so sure it's me?" This question basically confirmed Count Almond's guess. Erlemon's eyes flashed. He tried his best to remain calm and replied, "Now, in Winter Castle, the only person who wants me dead is you. I could be Colin's subordinate too? If you were Colin's subordinate, you would kill me without hesitation, and not like this, watching me struggle on the verge of death and enjoying the thrill of revenge." Colin laughed and nodded. "Erlemon, it's been hard on you to maintain a clear head in this situation. That's admirable." Erlemon ignored Colin's teasing and continued in a hoarse voice, "Colin, it was indeed my fault for sending people to Grey Castle to assassinate you. But you've already tried to assassinate me twice, Cynthia once, Vala once. Although I don't know how you persuaded them to kill me, I think we're even. After all, you didn't die back then." "Even?" Colin chuckled, his face full of mockery. "Do you really think I'll let you go?" "Why not?" Erlemon said anxiously, "I can pledge my loyalty to you and let you command the Oman family's army." He. Colin sneered again, "Your loyalty? Didn't you pledge your loyalty to the Duke of St. Hilda? But that didn't stop you from secretly colluding with St. Theon? If you don't believe in your pledge of loyalty, how about using benefits to bind you?" Erlemon spoke again, "As you know, Vala is my son. I've already made him my official successor. Your sister is married to him, so we're in-laws. Colin, believe me, I can give you advice. I'll fight for you. As long as you give me a chance. The current situation in the northern region is still unstable. The House of St. Theon is still a huge threat, and I have an irreconcilable blood feud with them. As long as you let me go, we can work together to defeat the St. Theon's family's conspiracy. Also, Miss Vera is the most suitable candidate to inherit the title of Duke of the Northern Region. As for Joyce, I have a way to make him lose the title of Duke completely." In order to survive, Erlemon had no bottom line. No matter what Colin proposed, he was willing to accept it. Colin smiled as he looked at Erlemon, who was begging for mercy in front of him. His heart was filled with the joy of revenge. However, he did not pay attention to Erlemon's pleas. Instead, he began the interrogation. When Vera and I rushed to the Golden Lion Legion's camp at the Rapids River, the Legion commander, Knight Nelson, said that they had received a letter in advance. The letter said that the Duke's body would be fake. "Did you write this letter?" Erlemon immediately denied it. "This matter has absolutely nothing to do with me." "Is that so?" Colin frowned. He had originally guessed that the Oman family and the Morrison family were secretly in cahoots. That was why they had swapped the Duke's body in Floral City in an attempt to stop Vera from taking over the command of the Golden Lion Legion. Could it be a conspiracy by the St. Theon family? Originally, Colin had thought that the Morrison family was loyal to the House of St. Hilda and would not be roped in by the St. Theon family. However, it seemed that this was not the case. When Erlemon heard this, he said helplessly, "At that time, I had already broken off relations with the St. Theon family. I really did not know whether this letter was a conspiracy or not. However, Mr. Oman values you very much. If he knew that you and Vera were trying to control the Golden Lion Legion, he would definitely try to stop you." Perhaps worried that such an answer would not satisfy Colin, Earl Almond quickly followed up with another question. "Also, I can guess who Mr. Oman ordered to steal the Duke's body." "Who?" Erlemon did not answer directly. Instead, he asked, "Did you stop at Floral City on your way to the Rapids River?" "That's right," Erlemon said firmly. "It must be the Morrison family who swapped the Duke's body." Colin's eyes flashed. From the beginning to the end, he had not mentioned the Morrison family. Therefore, for Erlemon to be able to guess this, he must know something. "Why are you so sure that it was the Morrison family who did it?" Colin quickly asked. "Do you think that it is impossible for the Morrison family to betray the House of St. Hilda?" Erlemon asked. "There is no such thing as absolute loyalty in this world. I just think that the Morrison family and the House of St. Hilda have been married for so many years that they have almost become a side branch of St. Hilda. Their interests should be aligned with St. Hilda's. It would be difficult for the St. Thean family to instigate them. Erlemon laughed coldly and asked, "Then do you know the history of the Morrison family?" This question obviously stumped Colin. He flipped through the memories of his predecessor and did not find any useful information. The son of a baron from the countryside was indeed ignorant. "Tell me about it," Colin ordered with an indifferent expression. Erlemon of course did not dare to mock Colin's ignorance and hurriedly explained, "Actually, the Morrison family was not originally the ruler of the northern frontier. They only moved here 500 years ago. And before that, their territory was in the east." "East?" Colin suddenly understood. "That's right." Erlemon nodded. "More accurately, it was the east northern frontier. The so-called east northern frontier was actually a name from 300 years ago. At that time, the east was still divided into two territories, the south and the north, the east northern frontier and the southeast. The ruler of the southeast was the House of St. Prospero, the current ruler of the east. And the ruler of the east northern frontier was the House of St. Thean. So, 500 years ago, the Morrison family was a vassal of the House of St. Thean? Yes, and at that time, they madly chased after the daughter of the House of St. Thean, trying to purify her bloodline and give birth to a holy knight. Unfortunately, they did not succeed. Perhaps they felt that the bloodline of the House of St. Thean and the Morrison family was not very compatible and wanted to try another holy knight family. So, the Morrison family made a move to the northern frontier, swore allegiance to the Dukes of the North, and then began to madly chase after the daughter of the House of St. Hilda. Ha! What a bunch of stubborn lunatics. Colin was also somewhat speechless. This Morrison family was really strange. However, this does not mean that the Morrison family is still colluding with the House of St. Thean. After all, 500 years have passed, and the Morrison family has long been bound to the House of St. Hilda. Would they still care about old ties? Erlemon shook his head. "No, I do not think that the Morrison family is colluding with the House of St. Thean because of old ties." "Then what is the reason?" Erlemon's gaze was serene as he slowly said, "Viscount Angley, you may not know this, but this is not the first time the Morrison family has stolen the body of a holy knight." Colin's heart skipped a beat, and he hurriedly asked, "Have they stolen it before?" "When they were in the northern frontier, they tried to steal the body of a holy knight from the House of St. Thean. However, they were discovered by the House of St. Thean. After paying a painful price, the House of St. Thean let them go, but they expelled them. This is another reason why they moved to the northern frontier. So, when you passed by Floral City with the Duke's body, the Morrison family could not resist the temptation of the holy knight's body." Colin came to a sudden realization. He now understood that the Morrison family had no concept of loyalty. Their family mission was to find out the secret of the holy knight's bloodline, so that their descendants could produce a holy knight. But then Colin had another doubt. "How do you know that the Morrison family tried to steal the body of a holy knight from the House of St. Thean? This information should not have been made public, right?" Indeed, if this information was made public, the Morrison family would definitely be hated by everyone. The northern frontier would also not accept a family that desecrated the body of a holy knight. "I saw this record in the House of St. Thean's ancient books," Erlemon explained. "Mr. Chong placed the House of St. Thean's library in Fallen Eagle City. At that time, I thought it was because he trusted me, but now that I think about it, it should be to educate his own son, Lawrence." Colin stared blankly for a moment, clearly shocked by this news. Lawrence was actually Penny and Mr. Chong's son. "Well," Colin observed a moment of silence for the cuckold. "Do you have anything else to ask?" Erlemon asked carefully. Colin shook his head, his eyes gradually turning cold. Count Almond seemed to realize that something was amiss and hurriedly shouted, "Wait, Colin! Don't kill me! I have a copy of the Duke of St. Hilda's will in my hands." Colin was stunned. "Moreover, this will clearly states that Miss Vera will inherit the position of the Dukes of the North." Erlemon had no choice but to throw out a piece of important news in hopes of survival. As expected, Colin fell into deep thought. After a long while, he coldly said, "Where is the will? Let me see." Chapter 262. Earl Almond heaved a sigh of relief. Colin's attitude made him understand that he finally had a bargaining chip in his hands. "Of course, I can't give you the will now. You should understand the reason." Colin certainly understood that the other party was worried that he would go back on his word after receiving the will, so he asked, "Then how can you prove the authenticity of this will? How do I know that you didn't just make it up?" "The will was shown to me by Butler Drindon. At that time, Knight Lewis and I had just arrived at the Lion's Roar Castle and had not confirmed Butler Drindon's position, so I deliberately threw the will into the fireplace and destroyed it in front of him. I did not expect Butler Drindon not to stop me. Instead, he was happy to see it happen. Only then did I understand that he also supported young Master Joyce to inherit the title of Duke." Colin was speechless. He then said angrily, "Since you have already thrown the will into the fireplace and burned it, then why are you still telling me this?" Earl Almond quickly shook his head. "I only threw a fake will in. The real one had already been swapped when I turned around and walked towards the fireplace." Colin looked at Earl Almond suspiciously. Obviously, he was doubting whether the other party had such a trick. "Trust me, this is not difficult at all." At that time, all their attention was focused on the fake will that was thrown into the fireplace. They did not know that I had already secretly hidden the real will. Colin shrugged. It was not clear whether he believed Earl Almond's nonsense. He then asked another question. "Then why did you hide the real will? Don't you want Joyce to inherit the title of Duke? Shouldn't you want to see this will that is beneficial to Vera be burned?" Earl Almond laughed and said, "Colin, if it were you, would you burn such a wonderful handle?" Handle? Colin suddenly understood. The so-called handle was, of course, Joyce's handle. If Joyce succeeded to the position of Dukes of the North in the future, then this will would be proof that he had obtained the position wrongly. With this will in hand, Count Oman would be able to control Joyce better. Understanding this, Colin couldn't help but admire the Earl's insidiousness. No matter who it was, he was always on guard. But that was to be expected. Based on Earl Oman's behavior, he had no sense of loyalty and was an ambitious man who only cared about his own interests. It was indeed possible to hide the real will. "I'm sorry, Count Oman. If I don't see this will with my own eyes, I won't believe it," Colin insisted. Earl Oman sighed and said somewhat helplessly, "How about this? I can give you the will, but you have to give me something in exchange." "What is it?" "The right to command the Golden Lion Legion." "Ha, you really dare to dream," Colin sneered. Earl Oman quickly explained, "With this will, Joyce has completely lost the right to compete with Vera for the right to inherit the position. The right to command the Golden Lion Legion is not important to you. However, I need this army to ensure that I won't become an abandoned chess piece. How about it? This condition is not a loss for you." Colin laughed and said mockingly, "Earl Oman, I think you might be mistaken about something." "What?" Earl Oman was a little stunned. Colin slowly approached the paralyzed Earl Oman and said in an extremely cold tone, "That will is actually not that important to me." "What do you mean?" Earl Oman was a little flustered. "Don't you want to see Vera inherit the position of Duke?" "Of course I do. However, I already have a way. As for that will, it is at most the icing on the cake, but you want to sell it at the price of charcoal in the snow. Moreover, I've been waiting for almost 2 years to avenge the assassination attempt back then. It has been 2 years. Do you think I will let you go so easily?" Earl Oman could no longer maintain his calm and shouted anxiously, "Colin, listen to me. Letting me live is definitely more valuable than killing me. I can help." Crack. Colin twisted the other party's neck and said softly, "But I think you are more valuable when you are dead." After saying that, he opened his mouth, revealed his sharp fangs, and bit down. Gulp, gulp. The rain stopped, the wind stopped, and even a corner of the moon peeked out from the clouds, shining its cold light on the ground. In the old warehouse, Colin raised his head from Earl Oman's corpse. "Phew. He let out a long sigh of satisfaction and a look of enjoyment appeared on his face. Count Amon's corpse had already been completely sucked dry, and it looked extremely terrifying. Colin's body heated up again. Fine sweat and blood seeped out of his skin. Bang, bang, bang. His heart was beating violently, as if it would break free from his chest in the next second. The violent blood flow in his body surged violently, almost bursting his blood vessels. Fortunately, with the experience of the last promotion, Colin was now mentally prepared for the drastic changes in his body. Even the bursts of pain seemed to have become a strange pleasure. Starting from the transcendent level, Colin found that the requirements and process for the advancement were very different from before. Before he reached the fourth step, he only needed to consume 1 or 2 liters of the blood of high-ranked knights to advance. Moreover, during the advancement process, his body would only heat up slightly, and there would be no pain. But from the 4th rank onwards, he found that he had to completely suck the blood of a high-level knight to complete the requirements for promotion. Moreover, the promotion process became extremely intense and painful. Bang! With a ferocious expression, Colin punched the ground, and spiderweb-like cracks instantly spread in all directions. His body began to swell again, and countless fine blood droplets formed mysterious patterns on his skin. Violent power filled Colin's body, and he could not help but want to vent it. Bang, bang, bang. After a few punches, the ground began to shake as if there was an earthquake. Countless cracks had already appeared in the dilapidated warehouse. Finally, it could no longer support the weight and collapsed with a loud crash. Lord, the tremors came from here. We heard thumping sounds and a few inhuman howls. When we came to take a look, we found that the buildings here had collapsed. A group of city guards led by a few residents of chilly Winter City appeared outside the dilapidated warehouse. The captain looked at the collapsed ruins in front of him, and his heart sank. He had just heard that the cathedral had collapsed and killed Lord Thomas. Now this place had collapsed as well. This time, would it kill any important figures? Where was this place? Did anyone live here? This is a dilapidated warehouse filled with unwanted items. I don't think anyone lived here. Why are you in a daze? Hurry up and clear the ruins. See if there's anyone below. Yes. This group of city guards and residents worked until dawn. When the first glimmer of dawn illuminated the ruins, they finally dug out 2 corpses from within. To be more precise, it was a corpse and a head. My lord, that head seems to be Earl Amon's. What? The captain was shocked. His worst fears came true. What happened in chilly Winter Castle last night? Why did so many important figures die? Why is there only a head? What about the other parts of the corpse? I don't know. We searched the ruins, but we didn't find any other parts of the corpse. The captain's expression was grave. This could only mean that before Count Amon was buried under the rubble, he had already died, and his head had been cut off. What about the other corpse? Whose is it? I don't know. I can only see that it's the corpse of a dwarf. Dwarf? The captain stroked his chin and ordered, collect the corpses. We'll report to Lion's Roar Fort. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.